Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode. This time, we invite you to join us as we discuss some of the absolute strangest missing person cases that we've ever encountered. Do you have theories on any of these? If so, please share. We'd love to hear them. Jared Negrete. 13-year-old Jared Negrete was a Boy Scout who was on his first overnight backpacking trip. He was last seen on Friday, 19th of July, 1991 at about 6 p.m. when he fell behind his fellow scouts on a hike to the summit of the 11,500-foot Mount San Gorgonio in the San Bernardino National Forest, Southern California. Another group of hikers spotted Jared straggling behind and notified the scout troop leader at the mountain summit, but the leader, an experienced hiker, said he would pick up Jared on the way down. When the leader finally decided to descend the mountain, Jared was nowhere to be seen. As soon as the troop leader realized that Jared had disappeared, he accompanied his 5 other scouts back to the base camp and then hiked about 5 miles in the dark to get help. San Bernardino County Sheriff's deputies, along with search and rescue teams from as far away as Sierra Madre and San Dimas, began searching a 130 square mile area of the San Gorgonio wilderness, a rocky, tree-lined terrain. Within 3 days, their search was focused on a 6 square mile area where a footprint believed to match one of Jared's high-top tennis shoes was found. Searchers also discovered beef jerky and candy wrappers believed to have been dropped by the scout, and most importantly, his camera was located. On the film roll were 12 pictures. Most of the photos were landscape scenes apparently taken before Jared went missing, but the final picture on the roll of film was a photograph of the scout's eyes and nose, taken with the aid of the camera's flash, possibly at night after he disappeared. Family members said it appeared Jared had pointed the camera at his face and snapped the picture. It seemed possible that the boy had lost the camera while sliding down a portion of the mountainside. At least 70 officers, some of whom were lifted by a helicopter into the forest, and horseback riders as well as helicopters with infrared were deployed. Over the next 2 weeks, as many as 3,000 people had logged 45,000 hours scouring 50 square miles of the San Bernardino National Forest from Angeles Oaks to Whitewater Canyon. Almost 30 years later, no other clues to Jared's disappearance have surfaced, and he remains missing. Casey Hathaway and the Bear. 3-year-old Casey Hathaway disappeared from his great-grandmother's backyard on January 25, 2019. Casey was playing with 2 other relatives in his great-grandmother's backyard the day he went missing. When he didn't come inside when the others did, his family started searching for him. After 45 minutes passed, his grandmother called 911. "He was walking in the woods back there and we can't find him," his great-grandmother told the 911 dispatcher. "The other ones came through the house but left him there and he walked off somewhere and we can't find him." Search and rescue teams from across the state immediately came together to brave the treacherous terrain and low temperatures, hoping to find Casey. 3 days later, rescuers were still combing the woods when they heard the missing 3-year-old boy call out for his mother. In the emergency room, Casey started talking about what happened in the woods. He said he had a friend that was a bear. The bear took care of him and kept him warm while he was lost in the woods. Casey goes on to say that the bear also fed him berries. Now, the local sheriff stated that there are bears in the woods of Craven County, North Carolina, but there's no evidence to prove one was with Casey. He goes on to say, "All that matters is that something was there to comfort Casey during the 3 days he was missing." Carol VanHulla. 3-year-old Cheryl VanHulla went missing on June 28, 1959, in the Dickinson County picnic grounds in Michigan. The VanHullas had 4 daughters and took them to the Dickinson County picnic grounds at Norway Lake for an afternoon of outdoor fun. Carol's mother was readying the group for dinner when she noticed Carol was missing. After a quick search, law enforcement was notified. A large-scale search was conducted using 500 searchers, a helicopter, and canines. Although the canines picked up on her scent, they would then lose it. About 13 hours into the search and rescue team could hear a faint cry from a child. In an area heavily laden with swamp and underbrush, authorities found Carol. The previous September, a 4-year-old boy had vanished under similar circumstances, but he was found dead of exposure 4 days after he went missing. Carol was taken to a hospital with scratches and signs of exposure. David Gonzalez. David Gonzalez disappeared while camping with his family in Fawnskin, California on July 31st, 2004. David asked his mother if he could have the truck keys. There was a box of cookies in the truck, and he wanted a treat. The vehicle was only 50 yards, 46 meters away, and his mother watched him as he walked to the parking lot near the Big Bear Lake campsite in Northern California's San Bernardino National Forest. She turned her back for a second, and when she looked around again, David was gone. David's mother reported that she heard no sound at all while her back was turned, though she did see a beige truck speeding out of the campground around the time that her son went missing. Since there were no signs of abduction, authorities did not pursue that lead. The cookies that David went to get were still in his family's locked vehicle, so he never made it to the truck. Rescue teams in San Bernardino County scoured the woods for David. They found no signs of struggle or of the boy. The search went on for 9 days, but rescuers never found him alive. In 2015, hikers stumbled upon David's remains about a mile from his family's campsite. Authorities chalked this up to a mountain lion attack, but how could a mountain lion have silently dragged a 9-year-old boy a mile without leaving any blood or signs of struggle? Surely David would have screamed or cried out, but nobody at the campground, including his mother, reported hearing or seeing anything. Ambrose Smith, gone for 24 hours. Ambrose Smith normally played happily at home in Newaygo County, Michigan. But on October the 8th, 2013, Ambrose was sitting in the lounge with her father when he briefly left the room, and upon his return, she was nowhere to be found. A massive search involving hundreds of volunteers was immediately activated, covering the entire surrounding area. It wasn't until the next day that Ambrose was found a few miles from her home. Strangely, she was discovered in a location that had been extensively searched the previous day. How the little girl had managed to traverse such a huge distance and evade the search teams who sprang into action so soon after her disappearance remains a complete mystery. Katherine Van Alst. 8-year-old Katherine Van Alst disappeared from Devil's Den State Park near Arkansas's Ozark National Forest when she and her family were camping. Katherine apparently was playing with her brothers when she wandered off and got lost. What makes Katherine's disappearance remarkable is she was found 6 days later. When found, she was wandering the woods and was eerily calm. University of Arkansas student Porter Chadwick was part of the search party that found Katherine. He told the Pittsburgh Press that when he found her, she walked stoically out of a cave and just said, "Here I am." Many other hikers have gotten lost in that part of the Ozarks and haven't been as lucky as Katherine. A grown woman was lost there for 17 days and died just 50 yards from the road. How did Katherine survive in the woods for 6 days? Did someone take her only to return her 6 days later? Or is there an explanation of this story that we simply can't comprehend? Either way, someone or something might just be lurking in Devil's Den. Larry Jeffrey. In 1966, a young boy by the name of Larry Jeffrey disappeared near the peak of 12,000-foot Mount Charleston in the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest, just a short drive from Las Vegas. The search began immediately after Jeffrey wandered away from his brothers, and within days, the National Guard and a team of bloodhounds had joined the search. When Jeffrey disappeared, he was wearing light clothing, and authorities were doubtful that he could survive the cold temperatures of the desert at night. Searchers found and lost the trail a few times, and they discovered evidence that Jeffrey had been eating insects and foraged berries along the way. Overall, around 1,000 people searched for 16 days, but never found him. One searcher said it was though Jeffrey had just walked into oblivion. Douglas Legg. On July 10, 1971, 8-year-old Douglas Legg was on a hike in the Adirondack Forest Santanoni Reserve when his uncle spotted poison ivy and told Douglas to put on long pants to protect himself. Douglas quickly headed back towards the family's cabin, which was a straight and short distance away, but he never returned. Now, unlike a lot of the kids who have gone missing in the national parks, Douglas was very familiar with these woods. His family owned the cabin where they were staying and described Douglas as a mini woodsman because they all hiked there together so often. Douglas' disappearance sparked one of the southern Adirondacks' largest search and rescue missions, with more than 600 people searching the woods. But like David Gonzalez, Douglas left no trail. Unlike in the Gonzalez case, though, rescuers used dogs in their search. Some accounts describe dogs following Douglas' scent over a 30-mile trail through difficult terrain. How could a young child, even one experienced in the woods, have traveled alone for such a distance? The family became so desperate to find Douglas that they began suspecting each other and even close friends of abducting Douglas. But investigators were certain that Douglas had simply gotten lost. It's been nearly 50 years, and Douglas has never been found. Alfred Barts. 5-year-old Alfred Barts is the first recorded drowning in Colorado's Rocky Mountain National Park, though whether Alfred actually drowned is controversial. On July 2, 1938, Alfred had gone on a fishing trip with his parents and 10 older siblings for the Independence Day weekend. Alfred was with his family on a trail near Fall River when he fell behind the rest of them and vanished. A search began immediately and expanded to more than 100 civilian Conservation Corps members within 45 minutes, but there was barely any sign of Alfred anywhere. The authorities originally believed Alfred had fallen into the river. They dammed it up and dragged it for 6 miles, but didn't find any sign of him. Bloodhounds tracked Alfred's scent 500 feet uphill before they reached a fork in the trail and lost the scent. A couple hiking in another part of the park, 6 miles away and 2,500 to 3,000 feet higher in elevation than the spot Alfred disappeared from, reported hearing a cry and seeing a small boy resembling Alfred on a high ridge in a treacherous area called the Devil's Nest near the top of Mount Chaplin. By the time investigators arrived there a day later, the boy was gone. An extensive 10-day search involving 150 volunteers turned up no indication of the child's whereabouts. Due to the passage of time since Alfred's disappearance, his case is no longer being investigated. He was never found. John Doe and his robot grandma. On October 1st, 2010, 3.5-year-old John Doe, as he's being reported, and his relatives were camping by a popular fly fishing location near Mount Shasta. Around 6 p.m., the child's parents realized their son had suddenly gone missing. According to Mr. Doe, his youngster was there 1 second and gone the next. They scoured the area he had last been seen in, complete panic-stricken horror. After hours of feverishly searching, the little boy still had not turned up. Now desperate, the distraught father decided to call local police deputies and United States Forest Service officers. Rescue personnel combed the forest well into the night, yet there was no sign of the toddler. 5 hours after John had disappeared, authorities found him laid down on the brush directly next to a trail that had been previously searched. He appeared to be in a dazed, semi-conscious state. Mr. and Mrs. Doe attributed this to exhaustion and were simply grateful their little one returned physically unharmed. Medical staff gave full clearance, so the freshly reunited family were permitted to return home. Everyone's lives quickly went back to normal, yet only a few weeks later, the small boy would share a disturbing tale about his terrifying ordeal. One day, little John's grandmother, Kathy, who he called Cappy, was playing with him. Suddenly, he looked towards her and said that he didn't like the other Grandma Cappy. Confused, she asked him what exactly he meant. Little John explained that while he was lost in the woods, he'd been taken deep inside a mountainside cave by a woman he thought was Grandma Cappy. She led him into a cool, dark, spider-infested room filled with motionless humanoid robots. Scattered across the floor were dusty purses, guns, and other various types of weapons. As John anxiously faced his grandmother, he noticed an eerie light radiating from her head. In this moment, he realized she was not his real granny. Grandma Cappy firmly instructed the boy to defecate on a piece of paper. When he refused, she became increasingly agitated and repeatedly requested him to do so. Eventually, the grandma look-alike succumbed to frustration and moved on to a different topic. Allegedly, she informed little John that he had been planted in his mother's womb and was actually from outer space. Shortly after this extraordinary account, she took the boy back outside to a thicket and advised him to wait for help. Upon hearing this disturbing story from her grandson, an outraged Grandma Kathy called her son and demanded to know what he was allowing her grandchildren to watch on television. Mr. Doe lamented that he had heard an identical recollection only a few days prior. Initially, the two chalked it up to an overactive imagination. Yet the more Grandma Kathy thought about it, the more little John's story perplexed her. What kind of TV show would feature some of the ludicrous topics that the boy was describing? Even more chilling was the idea that she might have some kind of doppelganger assuming her identity in order to abduct innocent victims. With those particular thoughts in mind, Kathy decided to share a haunting experience of her own. Only a year before, she had gone on a camping trip within close proximity to where little John's ordeal occurred. In the morning, she awoke face down in the dirt. Somehow, she had been inexplicably removed from the sleeping bag within her tent and transferred a short distance away. Upon rousing, she felt an intense pain at the base of her neck. 2 puncture wounds were present, and the surrounding skin was red and inflamed. Another friend who accompanied her on the excursion suffered a matching affliction. The pair originally attributed these injuries to a possible spider bite. Both Kathy and her travel companion became violently ill. In fact, she was so sick that she could not even muster the strength to pack her things. Her mind raced as she desperately tried to recall what happened mere hours ago. Only one thing surfaced: glowing red eyes. While she was drifting into slumber, she remembered seeing several creatures gazing through the darkness. At the time, she assumed they were produced by a herd of deer. Following this traumatizing outing, Kathy felt completely drained of her creativity and emotions. Several months would pass before she felt like her old self again. Admittedly, Grandma Cappy would have dismissed her episode had little John not come forward with his first-hand encounter. Now, listeners to this channel are no doubt familiar with the legends and lore pertaining to Mount Shasta that have existed throughout the centuries. We've done a video about it. The indigenous peoples of the area chronicled a fallen race of prehistoric giants that were said to inhabit the region. Others claim beings known as Lemurians used local caves as entrances to an underground crystalline city called Theis. Some allege a large energy vortex is present within the territory. In modern times, there are many UFO and Bigfoot sightings reported. Each year, though, 26,000 visitors flock to this revered mountain from countries across the globe. There have been an alarmingly high number of curious missing person cases within this picturesque terrain. While little John Doe's incident seems unbelievable, it's important to consider the odd history and happenings afflicting this area. An open mind may be the only thing that will finally resolve this age-old mystery.
Helicopters flew over the rugged mountains near Lincoln, New Hampshire for 4 days, and search and rescue crews went out looking on foot. But it wasn't until Friday night that a couple of amateur hikers found 70-year-old Chris Staff.
I just got disoriented. I got on the wrong side of, there was washouts and things like that, and I couldn't find the right path. I'd see people across the river and, I'd tell them I'm in distress, and one guy told me to come across, and, I thought I had it. I thought I had somebody that's going to help me. And I don't know if they're real or not, because I crossed the river and nobody's there.
Lost in the woods for nearly a month, 25-year-old Lisa Theis beat all odds, living off berries and mushrooms and drinking from creeks to survive.
Back from the dead.
When I woke up and didn't comprehend what had happened.
Hiker Michael Napinski was lifeless when Navy crews found him in Mount Rainier National Park last weekend, lost overnight in below freezing conditions.
Just got a complete whiteout.
The rescue team flew him to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle when his pulse stopped. Doctors jumping into action, administering CPR after 45 long minutes, finally jump-starting his heart.
I'm extremely grateful to everybody here at the hospital for not giving up on me. I'm alive and breathing. And
well, the big question police are asking tonight is still simply how 49-year-old Konstantinos Stanifilippidis wound up missing here at Whiteface Mountain and turned up alive nearly 3,000 miles away 6 days later in Sacramento, California.
Amanda Eller, a physical therapist who was lost on a hike in Maui, telling her story tonight for the first time since she was found after going missing for 17 days.
I haven't even had time to think or integrate or figure out really what the heck happened in there. That's a very grounded way to put it, getting disoriented in the forest. But there was something bigger at play, So Mako Forest in particular, there's something very tricky there.
Tonight, rescuers are calling it a miracle. A teenager surviving 8 days alone in the Washington wilderness on creek water and berries.
Sons John Karski and Jonas Irwin feared the worst after rescue missions by land and sea turned into recovery efforts for their parents, Carol and Ian. Family and officials say it was thanks to the couple's background in the outdoors that helped them survive.
Mom's like an herbalist, like a mushroom hunter. My dad, with his background in mountaineering, they know how to find things and eat. So they were eating some part of a fern.
My mother said, I lost a shoe. So I was walking with one shoe, and then I lost the other shoe, and I kept walking in my socks, and then I got tired of walking in my socks, so then I was walking bare feet for a while, and she's 77 years old.
He was laying his body flat into that awful thorny crap, which poison oak, you name it, so that Carol could go over him.
Police and 19-year-old Madison Popalizio never came home Sunday after hiking on Mount Algonquin. More than 60 people set out to search for them Monday, fighting their way through deep snow and rough terrain. 36 hours after they went missing, the hikers were airlifted from just below the 5,000-foot summit.
Tonight, the miraculous rescue of Cheryl Pal, finally surrounded by family again. The 60-year-old who went missing in Central California's White Mountains, found alive just hours ago, 3 days after she vanished in the wilderness.
A remarkable story of survival. New details tonight about a mother from the San Fernando Valley who was stranded in Utah's Zion National Park. She was missing for nearly 2 weeks before she was finally rescued.
Now, we're all familiar with cases where people have gone missing in the forest, having left no trace and are never seen again. But what of the people who went missing and have returned? In many instances, these people tend to be unable to remember what happened during their ordeal. Now, this is understandable in the case of small children, but it's a common situation with adults who've gone missing and returned as well. Oftentimes, though, even those who do remember are reticent to talk about what happened when they were missing. Now, this may sound odd, but when you hear the stories of those who are willing to talk about it, it starts to make more sense. Presented here are 13 stories of those who have disappeared, yet lived to return and share their bizarre tales. Let's begin. Robert Singley. Now, if you ask the locals in Bennington, Vermont, they'll tell you there's something very wrong with Glastonbury Mountain. That particular stretch of the Appalachian Trail has caused many investigators into the paranormal to come to some pretty ominous conclusions because of all the people who have gone missing there, never to be seen again. Some call it the Bennington Triangle, a reference to the Bermuda Triangle, where not only people but planes and ships go mysteriously missing, never to be seen again, with no rhyme, reason, or explanation. There are also tales told of a Bennington monster, which attacks humans and abducts them, leaving no trace they were ever there. Others still talk of the Native American stories of rocks that open up and swallow people whole in this place, as this is where the four winds meet. None of this seemed to be of any concern, though, to 27-year-old UBC music teacher Robert Singley, when he decided to go for a hike one Sunday afternoon a couple of years ago. Robert hiked the trail often when he lived in Bennington and never had any strange experiences or problems. He hiked Harbor Road in Woodford Hollow and had a pleasant enough time despite the cold temperature. However, while he made his way back to his car, he suddenly became very disoriented. He attempted to make a fire once he realized he was lost, and because darkness was falling, he didn't stand much chance of making it back to his car until daylight came. However, his attempts were futile because of the rain that suddenly started almost immediately upon Robert losing his way. As his girlfriend at home worried, Robert struggled to gain an understanding of what happened, why he had so suddenly become confused and disoriented. Robert stated, "I still think I got sucked through some sort of space-time continuum." He often took these long hikes, but on this day, fog came out of nowhere, and it was instantly dark, seemingly much before the time of nightfall. Robert couldn't explain how he managed to just lose the trail he was so steadily walking on only seconds before. He spent the night underneath a tree and somehow made his way out the following day. He is one of the lucky ones. This exact spot is where Paula Weldon, a Bennington College sophomore, was last seen alive 62 years ago. There's something about random inclement weather in these cases, kind of like Mother Nature is playing a game. Seems that in a lot of missing person cases, immediately once a search starts, foul weather comes in. Now, what is causing all these seemingly healthy and somewhat experienced hikers to suddenly and for no apparent reason become disoriented and start wandering through deep woods instead of sticking to their trails? That's a question we may never have an answer to, but let's move on. Christopher Staff. Christopher Staff, a 70-year-old man from Dorchester, Massachusetts, went hiking alone in New Hampshire's White Mountains. He decided to embark on the very challenging 31-mile Pemigewasset Loop Trail with no problems or concerns. He had even called his wife the following day and told her he would be home by that evening. He seemed in good spirits and as though the hike had been going well. Later that evening, after receiving no further word from Christopher, his wife called the authorities and reported him missing. A large-scale rescue effort was put in effect with 18 teams, including nearly 30 officers and volunteers, all out scouring the trail and surrounding areas looking for any sign of Christopher. Fear for his life and well-being mounted as the days passed by, and no sign was found that Christopher had even been in these woods or along this trail. However, the following Friday, 5 days after Christopher had initially set out for his hike and seemingly disappeared without a trace, he was found just sitting on a log, covered in scratches, blisters, and bug bites, and was only able to walk to the rescue vehicles with assistance. When questioned about what happened, Christopher stated, "I'm still trying to sort it all out." Christopher was an experienced hiker of more than 40 years and thought he had been well prepared for most anything that would come up while he completed the hike of a lifetime after turning 70 years old. Christopher was less than 5 miles from the end of the 31-mile loop when something went very wrong. He says he suddenly became disoriented on the path and couldn't find the right way to go. He had lost his backpack, which contained water, and had to resort to drinking from the river. Now, this may or may not have had to do with him then spending the next 3 to 4 days hallucinating. "I didn't know where I was," he says. "I thought I came home. I thought I came to get my wife's car. All kinds of crazy things." Christopher had lost 25 pounds and was found less than 5 miles away from the road where his car was left. He just couldn't move anymore. He even mentioned hallucinating while at the river that he saw and heard searchers coming to get him and looking for him. However, when he would blink, they would be gone. I just kept reliving it, Christopher says. He knew Friday would be his last day if help hadn't arrived by then. He was seemingly traumatized from the event and hasn't really recovered. Now, how does someone end up hallucinating like this suddenly and out of the clear blue sky? Christopher had just turned 70 years old, but was in great shape and healthy, so what caused him to simply give up and sit on a rock when he was so close to help the whole time? After all the wandering he had done, was 5 miles really that far for him to traverse to get to the main road? Was whatever made him sick and disoriented somehow stopping him from going on? What could have possibly caused such vivid hallucinations? Story after story, it's the same thing. Point of separation or going out alone and becoming disoriented and hallucinating. Here's another one. Michael St Laurant. 45-year-old construction safety worker and experienced hiker Michael St Laurant went missing for 9 days in the wilderness of the North Vancouver backwoods. He scribbled pertinent information about himself onto his arm. His birth date, name, and social insurance number were sloppily scrawled there just in case he didn't make it out of the woods alive. This all started on November 13, 2011, near the Grouse Mountain Sky Ride, where, while hiking a trail, he suddenly and without warning became confused and disoriented, not knowing where he was going, and what was and was not even real. Michael's account is somewhat confusing and even contradictory, as he states he was hallucinating so badly for most of the time, it was hard for him to recall most of what had occurred during his 9 days of hell in the woods. Michael had planned to hike a roughly 8-hour round-trip trail. However, he was somehow held up and forced to spend the night in the deep wilderness. Fortunately for him, he happened to have not only a dry change of clothes, but a tarp with him, and managed to stay at least partially dry and semi-warm in the frigid Vancouver winter cold. Michael even prepared for a 2-day trip, though he expected to only stay one, assuming he would be fine and ahead of the game in case anything unforeseen came up. Unfortunately for him, something did. It lasted much longer than the 2 days, though. Michael's mind was so foggy and muddled, however, that after becoming lost and veering off the main trail, he couldn't even manage to find any kindling there in the woods, despite the ability to make a fire by hand. For the next 7 days, he wandered aimlessly around the woods, dehydrated, hypothermic, and vividly hallucinating nonstop. He said his hallucinations included being at work, driving home, and even sitting down for a meal in his favorite restaurant. After just 3 days, he thought it had been 3 weeks. Although there were numerous hikers who passed through the area within view of him, Michael was seemingly totally unable to communicate with them in any way. Not for lack of trying, though, as he says he called out for help and did everything he could to get their attention, but to no avail. It was almost like he was invisible to anyone and everyone who passed him by. The only thing the searchers believed saved him was his somehow remarkable ability to remember to cover himself at night with a tarp. At times, he had even had to crawl as he had developed a condition from wearing soaked footwear called trench foot. When speaking to the media after being rescued, Michael told them he had seen and heard the searchers looking for him, but was unable to communicate with them and gain their attention, and somehow he claimed they hadn't been able to see or hear him at all. The search and rescue teams deny ever being anywhere near the area Michael stated he saw and heard them. What prompted Michael to write down his personal information on his arm, just in case? He said himself it was a regular day and he had the entire hike planned out. Is it just a coincidence that this is yet another semi-experienced hiker who, for one reason or another, was separated from his group and ended up lost in the woods? What is prompting these people to put themselves in harm's way like this? Lisa Theis. 25-year-old Alabama resident and radiology student Lisa Theis had a couple of strikes against her already as far as anyone finding her when she became lost in the woods in Midway, Alabama, for an entire month in July of 2017. She had severe bipolar disorder, and because of the crowd she was recently hanging out with, most who knew her thought she was just trying to get away for a while. After not being able to reach her at all in 5 days, her father eventually called the police and reported her missing. After searching the most obvious places and coming up with no sign of her, The police then caught up with the last two people known to have been in her company, who were also wanted in connection with the robbery of a hunting lodge. When the authorities finally did catch up with these two men, one of them claimed the other killed Lisa and had disposed of her body. This led investigators to bring dogs into the woods behind a local Walmart where she may or may not have last been seen, and where the two men said they had last seen her. The other man said she was not murdered, but had jumped out of the truck and ran into the woods for no apparent reason the last night they had been with her. Because of the conflicting stories given by the two men and their shady and criminal reputations, police decided to go ahead with the cadaver dog search of the woods. After all, Lisa had been missing an entire month, and the likelihood she could survive out there in the wilderness for that long was slim. Eventually, Lisa was pronounced dead, even as the police still searched for her body. 2 days after this pronouncement, however, Lisa stumbled into the road in front of a random vehicle that just happened to be driving by at that time. Lisa had collapsed onto the roadway and an ambulance was called. She was completely naked, covered in sunburns and bug bites, and it was said she wouldn't have lasted another day had she not made her way somehow to the main road to be found and given medical attention. She had lost 50 pounds, and it was considered miraculous that she had even survived at all. Her condition was barely stable. When she was finally able to recount her harrowing ordeal, she gave an extremely strange and seemingly nonsensical story about what she had been through. She claims to have survived from eating wild mushrooms and berries and drinking muddy and mucky stream water. When asked how she had come to be in the woods in the first place, Lisa states she believes she was drugged and left there for dead. There is some question, however, as to how Lisa could have survived based on her claims. Number one, she was legally blind and didn't have her glasses. Number two, the berries she claimed to have eaten didn't grow in that area. And thirdly, mushrooms are made mostly of water and have no calories at all. Also, she would have gotten terribly ill, if not dying altogether, from drinking the water she claims to have hydrated herself with. What really happened to Lisa? How could she have eaten berries which didn't grow in the particular area? Was she making it all up, or had she possibly slipped into another dimension or something? Those are questions to which we may never have the answers. Michael Nepinski. 45-year-old Michael Nepinski of Woodinville, Washington, went on a hike in Mount Rainier with a friend on November 7, 2020. The two decided to separate below the Muir snowfield, with Michael snowshoeing to Paradise and his friend continuing on skis to Camp Muir. They were going to meet up at a designated time down near Paradise, close to where Michael was heading to. Suddenly and seemingly out of nowhere, Michael reports the weather turned to extreme whiteout conditions, which prohibited him from being able to see even an inch in front of his face. Obviously, this made it impossible for him to go any further. He recalls taking very small and easy steps to get himself slowly down the mountain, while still seeing nothing but the whiteout conditions ahead of him. This is the last thing he remembers before becoming confused about the next course of events. He says he thinks he fell, but can't be sure as he totally blacked out and has no memory of what actually occurred while he was blindly snowshoeing through the blizzard conditions. Needless to say, Michael didn't make it back to meet his friend near Paradise that evening and was reported as missing. 3 National Park search teams went out and conducted full searches of the area throughout the night, and because the temperatures being 16 degrees Fahrenheit and the whiteout causing minimal to no visibility, the searches were called off for the night. Early Sunday morning, however, the search teams went back out to look for Michael, though everyone's thoughts were grim and thinking the worst at this point. Because of the cloudy weather, too, the aerial searches weren't able to be started until late Sunday afternoon, nearly 24 hours after Michael had been reported as missing by his concerned friend. Helicopter searchers finally found Michael Nepinski in the Nisqually River drainage, and by the time foot searchers got to him about an hour after he was first sighted, he was unconscious. He had a pulse, though weak as it was, when he reached the hospital, but went into cardiac arrest very shortly after arriving. The doctors began using the most advanced form of artificial life support available, which included bypassing his heart and lungs. Miraculously, or some say coincidentally due to the location where he went missing and all the strangeness surrounding Mount Rainier itself, Michael was legally deceased for 45 minutes, yet was able to be brought back to life with no long-term negative effects. Although he remained unconscious for 2 days after his heart started beating again, Michael did wake up and come back to life suffering some frostbite and bruises and scratches, all of which will heal. Is it just a coincidence that this man, who had all of the same bizarre and seemingly random symptoms as so many of the other cases we've talked about here, was miraculously able to return from the dead after 45 minutes? That's not even supposed to be possible. What is really going on here? Danny Philippides. On February 7, 2018, Danny Philippides ventured from his home in Toronto, Canada, to the Whiteface Mountains of New York for a seemingly typical ski trip with some co-workers. The 49-year-old firefighter went missing on the mountain when he separated from the group to go to his car and retrieve his cell phone, which he had initially forgotten to bring with him. He went off by himself, figuring he would be right back and go back to having fun with his friends and colleagues. However, that isn't what happened at all, and despite little bits and pieces that have come out since, we will perhaps never really know what happened to Danny Philippides. Despite having no memory of what happened after he started back down the mountain to go to his car for the phone, he believes he took a wrong turn on a children's ski slope. The doctors would later confirm that he did seem to be suffering from a head injury, but even that doesn't explain where Danny ended up after leaving his friends to run the quick and seemingly harmless errand. Once Danny was reported missing, a manhunt of epic proportions set out to try and find him. At least 6 government agencies joined the 2 local ski patrols and several volunteers in the search. Eventually, more than 135 volunteers searched the area he was last seen and the route he should have taken to his car, which was still parked in the exact same spot he had left it, with the cell phone inside, for a total of 7,000 hours, but to no avail. How could they possibly have known that Danny was at that time in a big rig truck hitchhiking across the country to California? Danny also remembers being dropped off in Sacramento, still wearing his ski clothes and with a brand new cell phone and, inexplicably, a haircut. He was eventually found wandering around the Sacramento Airport rental car facility's parking lot. He had absolutely no idea or clue as to how he ended up there or why. The authorities found him got the surprise of a lifetime when they learned he was the subject of a massive manhunt all the way on the other side of the country. Obviously, so did Danny upon learning the same information. What happened in those 6 days? Where did Danny get the haircut and the new iPhone? And what could have possibly led him all the way across a foreign country like that? More than 2 years later, and these questions still haven't been answered. They may never be either, as Danny has since chosen to remain quiet about the ordeal and has gone back to work in Toronto as a firefighter. Unfortunately, so many of these people who go missing and are found under extraordinary circumstances choose to remain silent about what they encountered, even the ones who remember very clearly. Is this another symptom caused by who or what is doing this to these people? The inability to express what happened? Or is it that there are just no words in their vocabulary to explain what they might have seen or experienced? Amanda Eller. Amanda Eller is a 35-year-old physical therapist and yoga instructor who wanted to go and explore the Makawao Forest Reserve on the northern side of Maui, Hawaii, on May 9, 2019. What was supposed to be a 3-mile relaxing hike to help her get closer to nature ended up turning into a 3-week ordeal that had her fighting for her life. Ellen was reported missing when she never showed back up when she said she would, and when her car was spotted parked near a vast forest reserve in Hawaii, it prompted thousands of volunteers to come out and start immediately searching the vast jungles and streams in the surrounding areas. On a Friday afternoon, 17 days after she first headed out on her hike, and less than an hour after her family had announced a $50,000 reward for information leading to her whereabouts, Ms. Eller was found with sunburn, scrapes, a torn ligament in her knee, and a broken leg. She was malnourished, but she was alive. So what happened to Amanda Eller? How had she become so lost so quickly on what was seemingly a simple and easy, relaxing trail walk through which she had gone many times before without any problems? Now, it's true the area of the reserve is 2,000 acres and has such thick vegetation and brush it needs to be hacked with machetes, but Amanda was on a trail. Here's what she had to say. Amanda claimed she was just going on the short trail walk, which she had done many times before and was really enjoying it. It was just a typical thing on a typical day. As she went off the path at one point to sit and rest, she became disoriented and confused. She stated a very strange gut instinct was pulling her into the opposite direction than the one she was familiar with and knew was right. She decided to go the way towards where she thought her car was, figuring if she just walked towards there, at least she would have a handle on where she was headed. She ended up hiking from around 10:30 a.m. that morning until midnight that night in a desperate search for her car. She admits being ready to just give up and stop trying, but claims as soon as she did, she would hear a certain very loud and strong insistent voice telling her that if she wanted to live, she needed to keep going. She stated, "As soon as I would doubt my intuition and try to go another way than where it was telling me, something would stop me. A branch would fall on me. I'd stub my toe, or I'd trip." So it seems the same gut instinct that seemed to have initially led her astray was in fact now leading her back to where she needed to be, back on the right path. Many people have started to believe that Amanda had actually been abducted. Her cell phone, water bottles, and wallet were all left behind in her car. On the third day, she'd given up looking for her car and decided to start looking for water instead. However, she fell off a 20-foot cliff and tore the ligament in her knee, while the very next day, she lost her shoes in a flash flood. She was only wearing a tank top and yoga pants to begin with, and the injury and loss of her shoes slowed her down considerably. At night, she covered herself with ferns and branches and leaves. She even spent one night in a wild boar's den. She survived by eating almost anything she could find, things that were identifiable and some that weren't. She even ate moths that landed on her body. She began to crawl instead of walking and was then confronted with a seemingly impassable steep drop-off. Meanwhile, the volunteer searchers were going through their own harrowing ordeals as the search for Amanda led many of them into fast-moving streams and had them rappelling into ravines. Some even killed aggressive wild boars and searched the dead animals' intestines for Amanda's body parts. At least one searcher was attacked by a wild boar but managed to get away and survive. Amanda stated later that she had seen and heard multiple helicopters, but despite trying her best to get their attention, they never spotted her. Until eventually, one did and sent rescue. How did this woman survive so many days in the wilderness, with no shoes and with the injuries and Mother Nature seemingly against her at every single turn? Could it have been the voice she heard, loud and clear, telling her she must choose between life and death? If so, who or what was it? Luckily, Amanda chose life. Gia Fuda. 18-year-old Giovanna Fuda, or Gia as she likes to be called, decided to go for a drive on July 24, 2020, and was headed to a town about 70 miles east of Seattle. The teenager just wanted to go and take a short road trip alone to clear her head and relax. For reasons still unknown, however, she ventured much farther than she initially set out to and ended up far past the city views of Seattle and into the wilderness and wilds of a remote area of Washington state. By 1 a.m. the next morning, when her parents had received no response back from their many phone calls and texts to Gia, and when she herself hadn't returned home or even checked in, they decided to call the authorities and report their daughter as missing. At around 10 a.m. the morning she had left her home and started her trip, she was seen on video camera in a coffee shop near the town of Index. She bought a Bigfoot keychain and left. 3 days after her disappearance, on July 27th, a transportation worker found her car nearby that shop and reported it to the police. He said he only noticed the car because of the awkward way in which it was parked. After running the license plate, the authorities found that the car was Gia's and it had run out of gas. All the doors were locked and her purse and other personal items were left inside. At this point, the police started to think foul play was involved and maybe she had been forcibly abducted. Search and rescue teams were already out and looking for her as of July 26th, but the area made it impossible to track her by pings because it was a cell phone dead zone. On August 1st, some of the searchers found Gia's belongings, such as her shoes, Bible, bag, and cell phone. These possessions were found near Scenic Creek, and just a little while later that same day, Gia was found up a steep ravine sitting on a rock next to the river. Gia stated she had panicked when her car had run out of gas and decided it would cut some of the walking distance off where she'd cut through the woods to get to a gas station. She said that she was frightened and didn't know what to do, so she grabbed what she felt was most important that she could carry and locked the rest of her possessions in her car. She was found 10 miles away from the nearest gas station. She felt that walking along the highway was too dangerous, but ended up getting lost and wandering around the forest for 9 days. She thought she was only lost for 3 days, however, as she lost her sense of time. When she was first found, Gia just kept repeating, "I don't know where I am," over and over again as if in some sort of trance. She was eventually taken to the hospital, though, and managed to get through the ordeal with no long-term effects. It didn't go unnoticed, though, to many people who investigated or looked further into the case, that Gia had purchased a Bigfoot keychain right before going through this harrowing and terrifying ordeal. Coincidence or not? Karski and Ian Irwin. Married couple Cheryl Karski and Ian Irwin, aged 77 and 72 respectively, were staying in a cottage while on vacation in the Sea Haven, Inverness, California area in February of 2020 when, on their checkout date, which was the 15th, came and went without the couple ever returning home or being seen leaving. They went missing on the 14th and left belongings, including their wallets and cell phones, in their room, and their car was also still parked where it had been the last time they were seen. Little did they know their careers would come in handy while trying to survive 8 days lost in the wilderness. Carol was an herbalist and mushroom hunter, while Ian had a background in mountaineering. When the couple were reported missing, searchers scoured the area by air, boat, and land for days, but to no avail. Finally, on February 20th, officials said their search efforts were now transitioning to a recovery effort. Now, usually this means they assumed the couple were deceased and the searchers were looking to recover their bodies. Then, 8 days after they were last seen, the 22nd, the couple were miraculously found alive and mostly well in the dense terrain with only light hypothermia to recover from. Carol and Ian told authorities that they decided to go for a simple and romantic hike for Valentine's Day, but got lost in the dark. They couldn't find their way back and survived by drinking muddy puddle water. The couple is choosing to remain silent about their ordeal and said they may eventually be able to tell of how they survived a terrifying 7 nights in the Inverness wilderness. All we do know is that one point is a bit strange. Carol willingly took her shoes off, which caused Ian to have to lay down in thick thorns so she could use his body as a kind of bridge to walk across. One can only imagine what they each could have been thinking during all this, but it just doesn't seem to make much sense. Why not just keep her shoes on and walk across? Also, how does someone get so lost, even in the dark, on such a simple hiking trail that they end up in such an extremely dangerous and dense brush area? Until the couple decide to recount their harrowing ordeal, we probably won't know the answers to this one either. Maddie Popolizio and Blake Alois. Maddie Popolizio and her boyfriend Blake Alois had just reached the top of the second highest mountain in New York State, the Algonquin, when what they planned to be just a quick day hike very quickly went all wrong. According to 19-year-old Maddie, everything was fine around noon that day. The weather was beautiful, and the couple didn't foresee any trouble at all and thought it was going to be a regular hike through the beautiful scenery of the area. They couldn't have been more wrong. All of a sudden, and seemingly out of nowhere, a fog so intense, dense, and thick came over the entire mountain, leaving the two completely blind. They couldn't see an inch in front of them. Does that sound familiar? Only in this case it's fog and not the sudden whiteout of snow from a previous disappearance. Maddie stated, "As soon as we got to the top, a massive fog came over the entire summit. It was so intense I could not see my hand in front of my face. If I wasn't latched on to Blake, I would have completely lost him." Then, when a sudden snowstorm hit at the summit, the couple decided immediately that their best course of action would be to climb back down the mountain. However, whiteout conditions from the fog and snow prevented them from seeing the trail that they had followed up. They linked arms and decided then to walk towards a clearing they thought might lead to a trail back down. Unfortunately, as soon as their feet lifted off the rock they were standing on at the summit, they plummeted down 100 feet. This unfortunate turn of events landed them on the opposite side of the summit from which they'd originally climbed up. Luckily, the couple landed on bent, snow-covered trees and, with their snowshoes, tried to climb back up the side of the mountain to get back up to the summit and reassess the situation. This didn't seem to be working, however. Despite wearing the snowshoes, the couple recalled, "Even with the snowshoes, we were just falling through massive amounts of snow." Terrified and with nowhere to go, the couple returned to the more secure spot they had fallen to on top of the trees. Then they built a wall of snow to try and block the wind and light Ian's backpack on fire with a fire starting kit they had with them. The intense winds and heavy snow prevented any fire heat from being made or generated, though, and the couple feared they weren't going to make it out of this situation alive. Their phones had no power or service, and they spent the first day screaming at the top of their lungs for help, assuming they would be rescued by nightfall. However, that wasn't the case. They spent 2 more days this way, huddled together, keeping each other as warm as they could with body heat and each trying to keep the other sane. When they were finally rescued, they were located about 265 feet southeast of the mountain summit. Ground crews eventually came upon them, still on top of the bent and snow-covered trees. The couple told of how, on the first night, Maddie couldn't feel her toes because of the freezing cold snow, and in an attempt to keep her warm, Blake emptied out his backpack and zipped it up around her feet and legs. Within minutes, she regained feeling in her toes, but useful supplies such as their knife, rechargeable crank light, and 90% of their food were lost forever in the deep snow. There were multiple times where Maddie had fallen into snow which covered over the top of her head, and Blake lost his gloves pulling her out to save her life. Luckily, the couple didn't sustain any long-term injuries or effects from their strange and terrifying ordeal. Why is it that blinding weather always comes along in the blink of an eye and makes hikers unable to see and therefore puts them at risk for major injury and incapacitation? It's the same thing over and over again and completely defies any logic or explanation. Some may say Mother Nature is just a fickle woman and changes her mind on a whim, but there are others, those of us that don't believe in so much coincidence, who wonder, is there something else at play here? Cheryl Pal, 60-year-old Cheryl Pal from Huntington Beach, California, went missing for 4 days in the remote wilderness of the White Mountains near the Nevada border. She claims a knife-wielding maniac chased her into the backcountry. Cheryl reported that, as her husband set up their campsite, she decided to take their dog for a short walk. This is when she says the man accosted her. All of a sudden, some guy pops out from behind a tree or something, she said, as she described the incidents which led to her disappearance. It was scary. I was really nervous about the fact he was threatening to do my dog harm. Though she admittedly bolted right away, Cheryl says she didn't feel safe that she was alone in the woods until at least a full 24 hours later. Her disappearance kicked off an intense 4-day search by the Inyo County Sheriff's Department. They interviewed other campers in the area, Cheryl's husband, of course, and they even used a loudspeaker to call out to the couple's dog, Miley. Search and rescue also combed the area, searching on foot with dogs and conducting aerial searches as well, but all to no avail. The strange part is, though, that aside from not finding any evidence of Cheryl or her dog being anywhere in the area, there were also no reports of a suspicious person or vehicle either. Where had this man, described by Cheryl as big, burly, bald, and tan, come from? Where had he gone? Cheryl's family very quickly started urging the authorities to start working under the assumption that she had been abducted. Eventually, it was Miley the dog's barking that alerted the authorities to Cheryl's whereabouts. Aside from being very scared and extremely exhausted, Cheryl was found alive and safe. As for the knife-wielding attacker who initially chased Cheryl into the woods, there have been no reports at all besides her initial description of any suspicious persons, vehicles, or activities that day. Who or what was it that chased Cheryl? Could this be yet another reason for some of the many disappearances across the country and even the world? Why had there been no other reports at all about a suspicious-looking man? Was Cheryl somehow the only one who could see him? Even if so, what did he want, and why hadn't he given chase when Cheryl initially took off? Very odd indeed that he just let her run off and didn't give chase. Could he have been trying to lure her into the woods for another reason? Perhaps for someone or something other than himself? For now, we just don't have any answers. Alma Tolman. Alma Tolman was an Eagle Scout and experienced camper when he seemed to have vanished into thin air while on a camping outing on Antelope Island. Antelope Island, with an area of 42 square miles, is the largest of 10 islands located within the Great Salt Lake, Utah. Alma was dropped off on the island on Tuesday, April 29, 1998, and was scheduled to be picked up by his brother that Friday, May 1st. When his brother returned to pick him up, he waited several hours. As Alma's canteen and backpack were missing, his brother assumed he had gone on a hike. Eventually, though, when his brother hadn't returned, Alma's brother became very concerned he'd gotten lost or possibly injured while out hiking. Searches of the island and surrounding waters were done by boat, helicopter, and ground crews of up to 50 people. Dogs were also deployed to search, but no trace of Alma was found. There were reports of him cashing a check at a local Walmart after he'd been reported missing, and also surveillance footage of someone matching his description at a 7-Eleven in Syracuse. However, neither of these sightings could be definitively confirmed as Alma, and so the investigation went on. The strangeness of this case, however, has a total human element to it, with it later coming out that Alma actually did disappear on purpose to get out of moving to Italy that June and getting married. Seems Alma had a case of the wedding jitters and cold feet, which is kind of an extreme measure to disappear yourself for those reasons. Needless to say, Alma was found alive and well a few days later, and eventually admitting it had all been an elaborate ruse to get out of the move and the marriage. Holly Corrier. 38-year-old California mom Holly Corrier went missing in one of America's most beloved and most treacherous frontiers for 2 whole weeks without being found. Despite the media frenzy her disappearance eventually caused, nobody is really sure how Holly ended up where she did. It's speculated she was having some sort of mental breakdown as she left her house in the middle of the night without telling anyone where she was going. She later stated she was seeking a total disconnect from the world and wanted to be completely alone by herself for a while. However, Holly seemed to have gotten more than she bargained for, as while she certainly got some time alone, the injuries she ended up suffering were strange enough, but her story doesn't make much sense either. Here's what we know about what happened to Holly Corrier at Zion State Park and what she said when she was found on October 18, 2020. She was visibly exhausted, famished, dehydrated, had lost 15 pounds, and was found to have a concussion. What was supposed to be a brief spiritual pilgrimage turned into a fight for her life. Her disappearance is different because the widespread panic on the internet and the massive amounts of pleas for help in finding Holly and pleas from her family turned into conspiracies and hate messages, so many that the family had to cancel all social media accounts and even change their phone numbers. So, what caused all this vitriol towards a woman who simply wanted to disconnect for a little while and raise her spiritual vibration? What caused Holly to, seemingly out of nowhere, get up and sneak off like a thief in the night to simply go for a hike? According to her family, Holly is an experienced hiker who knows Zion National Park very well and is capable of surviving the extreme and rugged conditions. Holly hit her head on the sharp edge of a tree she had her hammock tied to, and this happened very shortly after arriving and starting up the first trail. This knock on the head caused extreme disorientation. After this blow to the head, she didn't have the energy to move around anymore. Despite being close to a river, Holly refused to drink the water because of concerns about toxicity. When found 2 weeks later, Holly was so dehydrated she couldn't open her mouth. Luckily, Holly was found alive and didn't have any long-term injuries. Her kidneys were barely functioning and she had an extreme lack of potassium. She did make a full recovery. One unanswered question looms, though, in both skeptics and believers of Holly's story alike. Why, when she could hear the searchers close and calling her name, when she called back to them, they never heard or saw her there? They were within feet of Holly. She was too weak to approach them, and they never noticed her yells, nor her person, sitting, literally praying she would make it out of this ordeal alive. Hello friends, and welcome to another episode. In this video, we invite you to join us for a trip down the strange rabbit hole that some refer to as the Bennington Triangle. The area known as the Bennington Triangle, which surrounds Glastonbury Mountain in the New England state of Vermont, has a long, strange history of bizarre occurrences. This includes UFO sightings, Bigfoot encounters, eerie lights and sounds, and the triangle also happens to be the location of several unsolved disappearances during the 1940s and 1950s. If that isn't odd enough, according to Native American lore, the area is heavily cursed. The Native American tribes of New England have always known something was off with the area and tend to steer clear of it at all costs. One particularly chilling legend from the Algonquin tribe cautions of the existence of what are described as evil rocks in the mountains, which have the ability to spring open and devour those unfortunate enough to step upon them. Now, this is rather interesting, considering how people have vanished without a trace from within the triangle. New England author Joseph A. Citro is the person considered to have coined the term Bennington Triangle in 1992 while doing a radio broadcast about paranormal and other unusual activity in the area. According to Citro's findings, he states that the area has similar characteristics with the equally strange Bridgewater Triangle in the bordering state of Massachusetts, which has been written about extensively by cryptozoologist Loren Coleman. The Bennington Triangle is centered around the heavily wooded forest of Glastonbury Mountain and also includes the small towns of Bennington, Woodford, and Shaftesbury, and also the abandoned or ghost towns of Somerset and Glastonbury. Over the last 200 years, there have been many encounters with and sightings of a Bigfoot-like cryptid in the area surrounding Glastonbury Mountain. The locals, as well as paranormal and cryptozoological investigators, refer to this unknown creature as the Bennington Monster. The earliest recorded sightings of the beast occurred in the early 1800s, when a stagecoach loaded with passengers was forced to stop its journey due to a heavily washed-out section of the stage road. The driver of the stagecoach observed that there were very large footprints in the mud, which were way too large to belong to any human. While the perplexed driver was pondering these prints, the stagecoach was suddenly attacked by a large creature that was strong enough to flip the stagecoach over onto its side. The terrified passengers stated that they observed a frightening pair of large eyes peering into the overturned coach at them before whatever the creature was screamed and then ran off to disappear in the surrounding woods. The passengers would later describe the monster as a large, hairy, black creature well over 6 feet in height. The area has long been rife with tales of people suddenly going missing within the area of the triangle. One of the oddest disappearances was that of a man named Carol Herrick in 1943. Herrick disappeared while on a hunting trip just a few miles northeast of the abandoned town of Glastonbury. Although his body was found 3 days later, it was observed to be surrounded by dozens of footprints, too large for a normal person. It was also determined that Carol appeared to have been squeezed to death. Then, beginning in 1945 and continuing for the next 5 years, people began to go mysteriously missing from the area with an alarming regularity. A man named Mitty Rivers, a 74-year-old hunting guide very familiar with the area, went missing on November 12, 1945. Rivers, who had led many hunting parties in the area over decades, was taking a group of 4 hunters to the oddly named Hell Hollow area, which is located within the southwest forest of Glastonbury. While leading the hunting party back to camp, he somehow got ahead of the other 4 and, for reasons unknown, never returned to the campsite. At first, the other hunters were not overly concerned, as they knew Mitty to be an expert woodsman and knowledgeable guide. When Rivers still had failed to return the next day, the authorities were contacted and an extensive search was held, comprising as many as 300 worried locals, as well as a number of U.S. Army soldiers who had been dispatched from nearby Fort Devens in Massachusetts. They searched through the deep woods for 8 straight days, but the only possible evidence found was an ammo cartridge for the same type rifle that Rivers was known to be carrying. The cartridge was found in a shallow stream, and there was no evidence of any foul play or animal attack nearby. Although they had no luck with the extensive search effort, many of Mitty's friends and those local to the area were sure with the man's knowledge of the woods and survival skills he would eventually return. However, this never came to be, and no trace of the missing guide has ever been found. The area from which Rivers vanished is near Long Trail Road and Vermont State Route 9. The very next year, on Sunday, December 1st, 1946, an 18-year-old college student named Paula Weldon went missing while hiking in the same area around Long Trail Road. Easily remembered because she was wearing a bright red jacket, several people recalled seeing her that day, including a shop clerk in Bennington who had provided her with directions, and also a couple of elderly hikers who had been approximately 300 feet behind her on the trail for part of their hike. The alarm was sounded when the college sophomore didn't show up the next morning for her classes at Bennington College. An extensive search was launched by local authorities and included more than 1,000 volunteer searchers. There were also searches conducted from the air, and with the assistance of the FBI, and a $5,000 reward was offered. When interviewed, the elderly couple who had observed Paula hiking just ahead of them on the trail stated that after they watched her turn a corner on the trail, she seemed to have just vanished. Despite the extensive searches and the offer of the $5,000 reward, no trace of Paula Weldon has ever been found, and her fate remains unknown. Exactly 3 years to the day of the disappearance of Paula Weldon, a man named James Tedford suddenly vanished from a bus on December 1st, 1949. A military veteran and resident of the local Bennington Soldiers' Home, Tedford was returning via bus from St. Albans, where he'd been visiting relatives when he vanished. Based on eyewitness accounts, Tedford and 13 other passengers were on the bus at the previous stop before the bus had arrived in Bennington. But when the bus pulled into the station, he had somehow disappeared. His bags were still in the luggage rack, and a bus schedule was found lying open on his now empty seat. The other passengers stated that they didn't see Tedford get off the bus at any of the previous stops, and he wasn't on the bus when it pulled into Bennington. Authorities investigated the disappearance and were convinced that no one had seen anything, and there were no suspicious incidents which had occurred during the bus trip. One strange and interesting fact: it should be noted that Tedford's wife, Pearl, had also vanished under mysterious circumstances a couple of years prior. Now, there aren't many details about his early life, but in 1940, Tedford was listed as a resident in Franklin, Vermont, with his wife, Pearl, who was much younger, her age being 28 while he was 56. The strangeness began following Tedford's return to Vermont after the end of his second round of military service near the end of World War II. Upon his return, he found that Pearl had vanished, no trace of her to be found, and the house the couple had rented in Franklin, Vermont, was found to have been left abandoned. Tedford's family claimed no knowledge as to the whereabouts of the missing wife, and stated the last time they had seen her was as she was on her way to the Amoco gas station in Franklin. There was speculation among the locals that, rather than having met with foul play, she had understandably grown tired of waiting for her much older husband to return from war and had simply taken off. Whatever the cause, she was never to be seen or heard from again. Tedford was crushed and moved into the local home for soldiers, where he still lived when he vanished. The next year, on October 12, 1950, an 8-year-old boy named Paul Jepson was the next in the area to go missing. Jepson was last seen in the cab of his mother's pickup truck in Bennington, where she had left him to play while she briefly tended to her pigs. When the mother returned, she found that the boy was gone. She quickly looked for him in the nearby immediate area with no luck, after which she reported him missing, and soon hundreds of volunteers had assembled to help search for the missing boy. Tracking dogs were brought in to aid in the search for the missing boy. The dogs were able to pick up his scent and followed it towards Glastonbury Mountain. However, when the scent was lost at a nearby crossroads, it was thought that perhaps the boy had either been abducted by a stranger or had otherwise accepted a ride in a passing automobile. Paul's father stated that, oddly enough, the boy had talked about visiting the mountain almost non-stop for the last week or so. The area around Glastonbury Mountain was searched extensively for the next several days, but sadly no trace of Paul has ever been found. Then, 16 days after Paul Jepson's mysterious disappearance, a woman named Frida Langer disappeared on October 28, 1950. Frida was camping with several other family members in the forest near Glastonbury Mountain. Langer, then aged 53, along with her cousin, Herbert Elsner, had ventured away from the family's woodland campsite to go on a hike near the Somerset Reservoir. They had managed to hike just a few hundred yards from their campsite when Frida lost her footing and fell into a mountain stream, completely soaking her shoes and clothing. Due to the chilly fall temperature in the mountains, Frida told her cousin to wait while she ran back to their campsite to change into some dry clothes. Her cousin stated that he waited for what seemed like a sufficient amount of time, and when Frida still hadn't returned, he decided to go back to the camp to see if she was okay. However, upon his return, he was shocked to learn that Frida hadn't returned to the campsite at all. She had instead apparently vanished in broad daylight in the distance of a few hundred yards. Frida was reported missing, and over the next several weeks, search parties with as many as 400 people, including concerned volunteers, law enforcement, firefighters, and military, as well as some aircraft, searched for her and came up empty-handed. Sadly, the search was eventually abandoned. 7 months later, however, on May 12, 1951, Frida's body was discovered near Somerset Reservoir, strangely enough, in an area that had been extensively searched many times previously. Advanced decomposition of her remains meant that no cause of death could be determined, and her case is still unsolved. And then, just as strangely and suddenly as they had begun, the string of disappearances stopped. Frida Langer was the last person to vanish mysteriously during this time frame, and the only missing persons whose remains were found. Other than the geographic locations and time frame, no other connection has been discovered that tie these cases to one another, although some have speculated that a serial killer may be responsible for these strange disappearances. Some blame the Native American curse, or simply claim that the paranormal is to blame, as there appears to be an active portal here into the unexplained. There's also the theory that the area is very unstable due to the unusually chaotic and confusing wind and weather patterns on the mountain, which can cause people to easily become disoriented and then lost as a result. Regardless of what is to be believed, the Bennington Triangle is known to be home to strange and mysterious paranormal phenomena. As well as the aforementioned Bigfoot encounters and the string of mysterious disappearances, there are many, many reports of strange floating orbs of light, sightings of other bizarre forest creatures, and even the occasional UFO sighting. Well, there you have it, a small glimpse into the unknown, courtesy of the enigma known as the Bennington Triangle. Hello, friends. In this episode of Unsolved Disappearances, we're discussing something a little different. While the majority of missing person cases we cover involve our national parks or forests or wilderness recreation areas, we offer these following cases as proof that people can and do go missing anywhere at any time. And this is nothing new. It's been happening for decades. Join us as we discuss missing farmers. Charles Ashmore lived in the town of Troy in New York State, United States, with his wife, mother, and minor son who was 16 years old, and his 2 adult daughters. Now, the family was very wealthy and respectable members of their community. Depending on who you ask, either in the year 1871 or 1872, the Ashmores moved from Troy, New York, to Richmond, Indiana, and 2 years later, Charles bought a farm in nearby Quincy, which he and his family settled on. Right next to their farmhouse, there was a creek, which brought the family their fresh, cold spring water no matter what the season. Around 9 o'clock on this particular evening, the night of November 9th, 1878, while the family all sat by the fire after supper, either conversing or possibly reading a book as a family or some type of entertainment that happened in the late 1800s, Charles Ashmore Jr. got up from the fire, and for the family, he was going to fetch himself a bit of water from the creek. He grabbed a clean tin can from the kitchen and walked out of the house. After waiting a very long time for the younger Charles to return from the stream, the elder Charles, his father, took the oldest daughter, Martha, with him, lit a lantern, and went off in search of the young man. It was early November, and a light snow had fallen outside, and though it lent greatly to the terrible cold both Martha and Charles Sr. felt right down to their very bones, it didn't deter them. It seemed the snow was a blessing in disguise, however, as in its light dusting, all along the ground it formed a path which showed the footprints of 16-year-old Charles Ashmore Jr. Father and daughter team dutifully followed the path the entire time, calling out the young man's name. All to no avail, as there was no returned response, and the tracks led to nowhere. Literally, they led nowhere. The footprints of the young Charles Ashmore Jr. stopped in the middle of the way from the house to the stream. The snow was undisturbed after they had walked about 75 feet, halfway from their front door to the creek where they got their water. Now, as this came to the father's attention, he silenced his daughter and calmly held out his lantern into the darkness of the night. They decided to walk around the last few footprints in order, if nothing else, to preserve them for further investigation. You can only imagine the stars shining as bright as they can, only late at night on a farm out in the middle of nowhere, full of fresh air, and the sky as dark as an abyss. They made their way around these footprints and then on to the creek. Now, as they approached the creek, it's said that all the strength was immediately drained from young Martha Ashmore, and the same can be said for the air in her father's lungs when they chanced upon what they saw next. The creek was frozen over, and had been for some time. It was covered even by the fresh snow that was falling from the frigid cold skies above. There was no sign that the younger Ashmore male had been there. There was no evidence that anyone had been there, in fact, at least not since the creek had frozen and the snow had started to fall. The next morning brought with it not only the warmth of the sun, but also more heartbreak to an already devastated mother and confused family. There had still been no sign or word from the family's only son hours later. It's like he was here 1 minute, he went to get water, and then poof, gone. 4 days passed, and nothing had changed except the melting of the snow. Miss Ashmore, Charles Jr.'s mother, had went to the creek to fetch herself some water. No one was around at that time to get it for, as they had been previously. She had been hesitant to leave the house and go near where her son had gone missing. Today, though, it was unavoidable if she wanted a drink. But the closer she got to the creek, the faster her heart began to beat. About halfway there, in fact, right around the same area where the last footprints of her son were seen, even though they had been washed away by the elements of the melting snow, she began to hear Charles Jr.'s voice calling for help.
Help me.
As sure as a mother could be, not just of what she was hearing, but of what she was feeling as well. Her mother's intuition, you might call it. She was sure of it. Her son was right there near the creek, and though she couldn't yet see him, she could hear him very well, calling out for help.
Help me.
It seemed, however, that the closer she got to the creek, the stranger things became. As she called out to her son again and again, and then silenced herself to listen from which direction his cries were coming from, it suddenly seemed like they were coming from everywhere all at once,
Help me.
but somehow also from nowhere, as she still couldn't see him. Not a single sign of him. Finally, the woman ran home as fast as her legs could carry her to wait for her husband to get home so she could tell him what she'd heard. Now, she was obviously very confused and nervous. After all, she had just heard the voice of her son calling to her for help, yet couldn't figure out where the voice was coming from. Actually, was he calling for help? Was he there at all? When questioned later on about what she'd heard and experienced, all of which was chalked up to a delirious woman, unfortunately a common diagnosis at the time, this was a mother who was so heartbroken over the loss of her only son and youngest child that she had gone momentarily mad, hallucinating that she had heard him calling to her. Now, this opinion was further backed up, at least by some, as when she was asked what she heard, she exclaimed that she wasn't sure of what her son was actually saying, other than that he was actually calling for her. She had stated that his words were entirely clear. She heard them as though he were standing right next to her, yet she also remembered not understanding what those words were, strangely. Was something supernatural going on here? Now, in the next few months, with no discernible pattern, other members of the family would, at random times, hear the voice of young Charles Ashmore Jr. calling out for help. Though the voice always seemed to be coming near the creek where he had seemingly disappeared, the closer they got to the voice, the farther away it seemed to move until, by all appearances, it blinked right out of existence. Again, this fell in line with what the mother claimed to have experienced. One thing each person in the family who heard the voice knew for absolute certain, however, is that the voice they were hearing was definitely that of the younger Ashmore. And again, no one was ever able to repeat what he had said, for though they claim his voice was so clear, it was as if he were standing right there, At the same time, it had still been too far away for them to understand the words. Even if he had been giving directions to his family wasn't able to comprehend them. No, this sounds strange. The sounds of help calling from the creek went on intermittently through the rest of the winter and spring, and would seemingly pick a family member at random to experience this and hear these words. Come summer, though, the calling voice seemed to come at further and further intervals, until finally, at the point of around about a year later, it stopped altogether. Charles Ashmore Jr. was never seen or heard from again, and no one was ever able to say exactly what had happened to him. No one even had a reasonable idea as to who or what the culprit could have been. So there was no choice but for the family to move on, with a devastating loss not only to their family unit, but to their very hearts and souls. Now, in the magazine Fate, in June of 1953, a very similar disappearance story was published. Depending on who you ask, you'll hear people swear to the truth of the legend, and still others will attest the story has been thoroughly debunked. Whatever you choose to believe about what happened to David Lang and his family, whether it be a well-written story which originated in the late 1800s, or a true account of something that really happened to a man in the same time period, I hope we can all certainly agree we are hearing more and more true stories just like this in modern times. In Fate magazine, the article was called How My Father Disappeared, and was allegedly taken straight from an interview with the daughter of the man who was said to have vanished into thin air. Now, she was a witness to the strange happenings that day and the days to come. Her name was Sarah Lang, and the story of her father disappearing mid-step right in front of her very eyes is one of legend, whether true or not. This is what she allegedly told the journalist interviewing her. On September 23, 1880, a farmer named David Lang was walking through a field not far from his house. His two young children, George and the aforementioned Sarah, played in the courtyard between where their mother, his wife, stood on the porch, and where he, their father, was walking in the field. Right at this moment in time, two men, a lawyer named Judge August Peck and his brother-in-law, whose name has since been lost to the mists of time and retelling, were approaching the house in a horse-drawn vehicle. All at once, David Lang's wife dropped what she had in her hands and screamed, while the two men in the buggy stopped, open-mouthed, and astonished at what they had just seen. Children also froze in shock and terror. Right before no fewer than 5 sets of eyes, which were almost exclusively on him, David Lang disappeared into thin air in mid-step right off the face of the earth. Despite there being a very intense search, no trace of him was ever found. There were no holes, no wells, no place that a man could have disappeared. However, it's said for years after this unexplained and terrifying incident, the family, the children in particular, would hear the voice of their father calling out for help. Though his words seemed to be clear, they were indiscernible, and the children nor anyone else who heard these intermittent cries could ever make out exactly what David was trying to say. A few years later, a circle with a diameter of about 15 feet appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, on the exact same spot where David is said to have taken his last steps here on Earth as we know it. He was never seen again, and just as quickly as the voices started manifesting, they abruptly stopped, and he was never heard from again either. Now, some people believe that the inability to corroborate any details in the Lang story is the reason so many still consider it to be just a retelling of an old fiction story written by popular author Ambrose Bierce back in the day. While the story itself is unreliable, with no record even of a David Lang or a Judge Peck anywhere in the county of Sumner, the similarities in the above cases is undeniable, however, and the Ashmores did exist and young Christian did go missing. It's a matter of historical record. As far as the details, though, who knows? So could each of these men have crossed perhaps into an alternate dimension? Is this why their voices were seemingly heard right in front of multiple witnesses? As clear as day at first, until they finally couldn't be heard anymore or understood? It's hard to disassemble facts and evidence in cases which took place so long ago. Many witnesses have long since perished, and Records had a way of being destroyed throughout history, purposely or not. Example, in Fentress County, where my father is from, the courthouse was burned during the Civil War, with lots of marriage and death records and tax records and deeds perishing with the fire. So in those cases, there's nothing left for posterity before the Civil War. As bizarre as it is for someone to seemingly vanish without a trace, it's even more strange and even somewhat terrifying, especially to those of us in the paranormal community who are somewhat aware and think we may have some answers or at least theories as to what's happening in some of these cases, for this to happen to someone in clear and full view of other people. Not only does it seem, in most of these cases, that the person couldn't have possibly gotten far, but it's absolutely impossible for them to have gone anywhere without someone else seeing where they went. As we on this channel know and have come to understand, this seems to happen a lot. Many cases have been sprouting up in recent years as well, leading us to try and come up with our own conclusions, hypotheses, and even just our own opinions as to what in the world is happening. Not only here, but other places in the world, if it's in fact in this world and not some sort of alternate reality. Where are these people going to? I'd like to close now with one of the earliest and most well-known accounts of what I like to call unconscious extinction. In the late 1760s, in a small English town named Shepton Mallet, there lived a man in his late 70s who by all accounts was crippled with an unknown disease. He was a retired farmer, and his name was Owen Parfit. Owen was completely unable to get around without help, and usually this help was given to him by his elderly sister, who was also his primary caregiver. Now, this unnamed sister apparently was a very good caregiver, and seemed to all who knew her to love her brother very much, and who took much joy in caring for him. So, because of his disability and inability to do anything on his own, Owen spent most of his days bedridden, but some were actually spent with him enjoying one of his favorite pastimes. He simply loved to sit outside by the doorway of his home, which he shared with his sister. One very chilly and possibly rainy day, Owen was sitting with a light jacket draped over him in his usual spot by the door outside of his house, while his sister/caregiver was keeping a sporadic eye on him while also trying to get some chores around the house accomplished. Owen's sister went outside to bring him inside for lunch, but what she found was an empty chair with the jacket draped over it. At first, Owen's sister thought perhaps a neighbor had happened by and saw Owen, who maybe asked to be brought in, and maybe she hadn't heard him calling her. You see, Owen was entirely unable to move around on his own, so it would never have occurred to her that that's what he did. She searched the entire house, all the surrounding property, and then asked the neighbors, but to no avail. Owen was nowhere to be found, and no one had seen him. The neighbors did confirm that they had seen Owen sitting in his usual spot by the door in front of the house all day long, just as his sister had said. They had seen the light jacket draped over him as well. Although an investigation was conducted by the authorities at the time, to this day, no trace of Evan Parfit has ever been found. Now, where did this man go? He wasn't able to move on his own. People observed him sitting on his porch with a jacket on, and then in the twinkling of an eye, the jacket's there, Evan's gone, never to be seen again. Hello, friends. Today, we'll be talking about unbelievable tragedies in national parks. On this channel, we talk a lot about the missing people all over the world, and especially here in our national parks in the United States. What many people don't realize is that there are so many other tragedies that happen on an almost daily basis that hardly anyone ever hears about. Now, these aren't always fatalities. Sometimes it's minor accidents and injuries. What we are presenting to you in this video, though, are those tragedies that end in a person or persons being deceased. What could have been done to prevent these disasters? Well, in each case, there's something different, and maybe, in some, even there was nothing that could have helped to prevent such atrocious acts of nature being brought about. Are these things being brought on by unseen forces? Are there other things at play here than just terrible accidents of nature? Let's begin. In Arches National Park in 2020 in the state of Utah, United States, a woman named Esther Nakajigo, known as Essie, and her new husband, Ludovic Michaud, known as Ludo, had left their campsite and gone to get some ice cream. What a simple act, having a hankering for something sweet while out and about exploring the wilderness. The fact these two were newlyweds just makes the story all the more tragic and bittersweet. It was a Saturday, and the weather forecast called for a high of 95 and a low of 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Bright, sunny skies, just driving along and eating their ice cream and enjoying each other's company, like only a newly married couple can. All of a sudden, though, a strong wind blew in and an unsecured gate sliced through the car like a knife through hot butter, according to an administrative claim that was filed in October of the same year. The gate missed Ludo by only an inch or less, but unfortunately, dear sweet Essie was not as lucky. An internationally recognized women's rights activist, originally from Uganda, the gate decapitated her in just an instant. In a split second, she lost her life. And her husband, originally from Paris but now living in Denver, Colorado, is now a widower. What makes this tragedy even more unbelievable is the fact that but for the price of a dollar store padlock, Essie's life could have been saved. At the age of just 17, she was rising to fame after being named the ambassador to women and girls in her home country. She was using the money she earned from this position to put herself through college and fund a nonprofit community health facility for women in the poor third world country. In the blink of an eye, her young and meaningful life was taken away, and her family is absolutely devastated, even going as far as to file a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the Parks and Recreation Services. It makes us wonder if going missing isn't the only way the unknown forces we speak of so often that are lurking in our woods, forests, and national parks can take such a meaningful and precious young life. It seems like there's something out there that just doesn't want us, or certain people anyway, in the woods. Also in June, but a few years earlier, 2016, a man named Colin Nathaniel Scott from Portland, Oregon, slipped and fell into a hot spring in Yellowstone National Park. Now, Yellowstone is the country's first ever national park. It spans almost 3,500 miles and is mainly located in the state of Wyoming, but even runs into parts of Montana and Idaho. The park is beautiful, with geysers shooting water over 100 feet in the air, mud spots, and waterfalls that will take your breath away. These are surely some of the things that drew Colin to Yellowstone in the first place. He had no idea these very things, these beautiful and breathtaking creations of nature, would end his life that hot day in June 2016. Colin's sister was recording him with her cell phone when he attempted to do something which is actually not legal in the park. He strayed off the designated boardwalk in the North Geyser Basin that bright and sunny Tuesday morning. Now, waters there can reach as high as 200 degrees Fahrenheit, 93 Celsius. Colin was literally boiled alive. He slipped and fell in accidentally while attempting to hot pot or soak in one of the park's thermal pools. According to the deputy chief ranger, the whole area is geothermically active. There's a closure in place to protect people from doing that for their own safety. It's a very unforgiving environment. That being soaking in the hot spots as Colin was allegedly attempting to do. That same ranger, Mr. Laurent Veras, alleges that Colin and his sister were purposefully ignoring the many posted warning signs despite the obvious potential for real danger. His sister recorded Colin as he reached down to test the water with his finger, and he slipped and fell in, being boiled alive as she watched on in horror, completely helpless to do anything but scream for help. Thankfully, his death was almost instantaneous once he fell in. He didn't suffer. But there was never any hope of rescue. An unforgiving environment indeed. Rescue teams located his body later on that day. However, due to approaching inclement weather, which we see often in missing persons cases, mainly a lightning storm, they were unable to retrieve his body without risking very significant danger to their own safety and even to their very lives. So, unfortunately, the recovery effort was held off until the next day. But by the following day, however, Search and rescue were unable to find any significant remains of the unfortunate young man who just wanted to have an adventure in one of the most beautiful and scenic places in all the United States. Mr. Veris said, "Unfortunately, there was a very significant amount of dissolving. He truly was boiled alive." Next, we have 63-year-old Robert Boardman, who was hiking with his wife and a friend in Olympic National Park in Washington State. He had to be rushed by the Coast Guard in a helicopter to a hospital in Port Angeles, where he was pronounced dead on arrival after being gored in the leg by a wild mountain goat. Mountain goats are not native, but were introduced into this area in the 1920s and can actually become quite tolerant of the close approach of humans. The problem is, once this happens, they become habituated and lose their natural fear of us, and then they're apt to try and start asserting dominance over us, which could lead to an attack just like this. Although normally not aggressive, it is recommended that you stay at least 50 feet away from them at all times and never ever urinate on a trail where there's potential for mountain goats. Also, people who are sweating, as I'm sure one would do during a hike on a hot spring or sunny day, will also accidentally lure the goat to them, as these particular goats crave salt, which are found in our urine and sweat. This particular goat, however, is said to have been known for its aggressive behavior, but was only killed after it had already attacked, gored, and killed Robert Boardman. According to a park spokesman named Barb Maines, rangers had previously tried hazing the goat, which means they tried to induce it to be frightened by human beings again by shooting it with beanbags and throwing rocks at it. She claimed that, though they knew the goat had been aggressive before this incident, she also stated that there were no incidents which warranted putting it down until Robert's unfortunate incident. Witnesses said that Robert, his wife, and their mutual friend were having lunch on Klahani Ridge when the goat started to approach them. It had gone unnoticed up to this point. Robert tried simply shooing away the animal, but it attacked him instead of fleeing. After goring him in the leg, which ruptured an artery, the goat simply stood over him so no one else was able to approach him until a ranger hit it with a few rocks and it turned to finally flee. Olympic mountain goats are only found in North America, and there are approximately 300 of them in this particular national park. The usual height and weight for one of these beautiful yet possibly deadly creatures is standing around 3 feet tall and weighing up to 300 pounds. Next, on Monday, May 3rd, 2021, Mason Stansfield, a 28-year-old from Ouray, Colorado, lost his life after falling into a crevice of a glacier in Denali National Park and Preserve in Alaska. Mountaineering rangers received a report from a satellite communication device that a skier had fallen into a crevice. Mason, who is an experienced skier, mountaineer, and also a mountain guide, was skiing with his partner, who reported she could not see or communicate with him once he'd fallen in, but alerted the authorities as quickly as she possibly could to try and get rescue out there before he passed away. Rescue was able to reach the scene and respond within just a half hour of the call for help going out, but unfortunately Mason died upon impact after falling and being found 100 feet below the glacier's surface. Mason's partner wasn't injured, thankfully, but she was taken to a nearby hospital just as a precaution. His remains were located that same day. A spokesman for the park stated that the accident had happened on a tributary glacier that flows into the main Eldridge Glacier. Mason had even done some mountain guide work on this same mountain in Denali before. He was a certified rock guide through the American Mountain Guide Association and had spent the last 6 years of his life working as a mountain guide out of Colorado's San Juan Range, as well as in other parts of Alaska. This just goes to show you that accidents can happen to anyone, regardless of their skill level, and you have to be not only experienced, but extremely careful and cautious whenever you're out in a place where you could end up being up against Mother Nature. In November of 2000, in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, rangers made a horrific discovery when they came across the bodies of an unidentified man and woman who were deceased and in an advanced state of decomposition. The pair were found near a spot where lava from the Kilauea volcanic eruption flows out into the sea. When this happens, plumes of steaming white seafoam erupt into the air in a glorious show of nature. The area, which is aptly named Eruption Site, is scattered with a glassy volcanic rock called tephra. Tephra are formed and then ejected into the air, quite violently, when the more than 3,600 degree Fahrenheit, 2,000 Celsius degree, lava is sated by the seawater. The bodies were located approximately 330 feet inland from the eruption site and showed no visible signs of trauma. It was first assumed that they had been struck and killed by the flying tephra, but later on, during autopsy, this was determined not to be the case. The final autopsy report was released 2 days later and showed the cause of death was actually pulmonary edema or swelling of the lungs. This was apparently due to them inhaling the hydrochloric acid fumes that come off the lava. The autopsy also showed that the advanced decomposition was due to acid rain. As the skin was either exposed to air or only covered by a single layer of clothing, it began to break down, but this was not due to the natural occurrence of post-mortem decay. All manner of toxic gases are released by the lava itself. These gases can include carbon dioxide, hydrofluoric acid, hydrogen sulfide, and sulfur dioxide, and when the lava which releases these interacts with the seawater, which we know is what puts it out as it flows into the waves, a bunch of other gases are produced. The highly corrosive hydrochloric acid being one of them. In the 10 years between 1992 and 2002, there were 45 serious injuries and 45 fatalities reported within Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. And this doesn't even include the minor injuries also reported in each of those years, from seemingly simple and somewhat common culprits, and also from some extremely strange and bizarre means as well. In 2002, stricter safety guidelines were implemented, and efforts to better educate tourists about safety when visiting the islands and their volcanoes were put into effect. Unfortunately, this was too little too late for this deceased pair, who still have no name to date. Next, the body of Patrick Madura, a 43-year-old man from Elgin, Illinois, was found deceased and being eaten by a black bear in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Patrick had been camping alone, but it is yet undetermined whether or not the bear had mauled and killed him, or he had died of some other cause and the bear just happened to stumble across his remains. Patrick had a backcountry camping reservation for a multi-night trip and was scheduled to stay alone in the Hazel Creek area until September 8, 2020. 3 days after he was supposed to have vacated site number 82, backpackers came across the empty tent and discovered a bear not too far away scavenging his remains. The bear was found to be very healthy and weighing about 231 pounds. Now, the Great Smoky Mountains are the home to approximately 1,500 bears, most of which are not known to behave aggressively toward humans. On the rare occasion a bear does show a propensity for aggression and shows a high risk or threat to visitor safety, it's euthanized by Park Services. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park is visited by approximately 11 million people per year, and the park implements aversive conditioning techniques for the bears by working hard to ensure that they don't become food conditioned or habituated to high use areas. This tragedy took place in September of 2020, and as of yet there have been no autopsy results publicly released, concluding whether or not the bear was the cause of Mr. Madura's tragic death. The bear in this case was put down by park rangers. An Israeli teenager tragically died just 2 months past his 18th birthday in Yosemite National Park in California on September 4th, 2018. Math student Tomer Frankfurter from Jerusalem was on another adventure as the outgoing teen headed to America before starting his compulsory service in the Israeli army. Tomer joined a group of other tourists who were headed to the Mist Trail. This is a rigorous 5.4-mile hiking route which takes travelers to the cliffs directly above the Nevada Falls, which is 594 feet high. After finishing the hike to the top and stopping to take in the breathtaking scenery and views from there, the group had lunch and decided to head back. This is when Tomer took off his backpack and handed it to another hiker, saying he wanted to pose for a memorable photograph before they left. He then proceeded to climb over the cliff's edge in order to take the ultimate selfie. Other hikers in the group were terrified and began shouting for Tomer not to do it and to come back away from the edge. In the blink of an eye, everything changed. Within just seconds, he was dangling hundreds of feet above the jagged and deadly rocks below. Before the others in the group could even realize something was wrong, Tomer started shouting for help. Everyone ran to his aid and tried to pull him up and back over the edge. They pulled him by his arms and wrists with all their might. However, he was unfortunately sweating profusely and slipped right out of their grasp. The group of tourists watched in horror as the young, intelligent man with his whole entire life ahead of him fell hundreds of feet to his death. Tomer had graduated early from high school and at the time of his death had already completed 2 years of college at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He was in the United States only to visit for a few weeks and was staying with a friend who lived in Fresno, California. He had gone to the park that day with the friend he was staying with, but had somehow become separated when Tomer met up with another group of students from Israel, Germany, and a few other countries on the shuttle bus in the park. The large group of students then all decided to hike the mist trail together. Tomer had explained to these other kids that he was waiting for the perfect opportunity to duplicate a photo taken by tourists in Brazil, one they commonly take at a place there called Telegraph Rock near Rio de Janeiro. Visitors there hang from an outcropping, making it appear as though they are thousands of feet above the ground. In reality, though, these photos are taken only approximately 3 feet above a trail. It's a trick of the camera, and it's unknown whether or not Tomer was aware of this when he risked his life to duplicate the photo and take the ultimate selfie. Unfortunately, there was nothing that anyone could do. The young man had died on impact. In the 6 years between 2011 and 2017, approximately 259 people all around the world have died while attempting to take selfies. Their average age was 23, and 3/4 of them were male, according to a study published in the Journal of Family Medicine and Primary Care. The most common cause of death for these people was drowning, with most being swept into the ocean by large waves. The second was transportation accidents like being hit by a bus or train, and the third largest cause of selfie deaths was falling from extremely high heights. It was suggested by a Vietnam vet and platoon sergeant who is also an expert in hiking and a tour guide among wilderness trails in areas as diverse as Rwanda and the Grand Canyon, named Michael Giglieri, that Yosemite and other national parks update their cautions of danger with today's youth and technology in mind, perhaps even mentioning taking care and maybe even thinking twice before taking selfie photographs. The Yosemite Park Service declined to comment on Tomer's death or any part of the incident, except to say they will not be taking Giglieri's advice anytime in the near future and will not be updating their safety signs and warnings. Finally, in April of 2019, a 69-year-old woman plunged 200 feet to her death in Grand Canyon National Park. Rangers responded to a call for help on the Grand Canyon rim. However, the rescuers just couldn't get to the woman in time. Her body was found below a rocky point near Pipe Creek Vista on the south rim. A group of approximately 15 rescuers used a park helicopter to recover her remains. Cynthia Ackley lived in the Phoenix suburb of Peoria in Arizona, United States. Cynthia's was just one of the many deaths that take place due to accidental falls in not just Grand Canyon National Park, but in parks all over the country. In Cynthia's case, a rare weather event caused by warm and cold masses combining caused a total cloud inversion, which filled the entire Grand Canyon with clouds in a short amount of time, and this is what is believed to be the reason she fell so quickly and without any warning. Well, there you have it, folks. What do you make of these sad, strange deaths? If you do go to the national parks this summer, be careful. Don't take risks. Obey those signs. They're there for a reason. We want you to go and enjoy yourself in our national parks, forests, and wilderness areas, but live to tell the tale.
We begin with a long and worrisome night for some Valley mothers and their sons after their sons failed to return from a camping trip.
South Carolina this morning, the search continues in the upstate for a missing Boy Scout in Greenville County. Authorities say the boy was separated from his troop during a hike at Caesars Head State Park. Sheriff deputies and helicopters have joined in on the search.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode. In this video, we're going to discuss not only the tragedy of kids who have seemingly vanished into thin air, never to be seen or heard from again, but Boy Scouts, children who are taught to survive any and all, allegedly, of Mother Nature's snares and traps. Every case is different, and all of them are completely tragic in their own way and as a whole. Here it is, folks. Boy Scouts who vanished while out in the wilderness. Some were found alive and unharmed, and others weren't so lucky. But all these cases beg the question, what could have happened to have made them seemingly forget their training and lose track of either their course or their sense of whatever it was? Why does this keep happening? Let's begin with the disappearance of Garrett Bardsley. In August of 2004, a 12-year-old boy named Garrett Bardsley from Elk Ridge, Utah, was on a scouting camping excursion with approximately 18 other Boy Scouts and 6 or 7 adult chaperones when he went missing and seemed to have just vanished into thin air. The group was spending time in the rugged Uinta Mountains. The Scouts and chaperones had gotten to the campsite on a Thursday and had originally planned to leave after staying 2 nights on Saturday morning. On Friday night at around 8 p.m., however, Garrett had gotten his pants and shoes wet while fishing in a nearby pond. Because of this, his father, who was one of the chaperones, sent him back to camp alone to grab himself a dry change of clothes. The campsite was a quarter of a mile from the water and was a distance of no more than 50 paces from the fishing spot. The trail from the water to the campsite was well traveled, well established, and very easy to navigate. Garrett's father and the other adults involved were not worried at all about the 12-year-old's ability to make it to the camp and back without any trouble. This young man was a Boy Scout after all, and had been trained on and prepared for almost anything that would come his way in the wilderness, or so everyone thought. Garrett himself was confident he would be right back and went on his way to go and grab dry socks and pants, and nobody thought anything more of it. When he hadn't returned after a little while, however, the adults became concerned and started to look for him, wondering if perhaps he'd gotten hurt or turned around somehow along the trail, either to or on the way back from the camp. His father, Kevin, walked the short trail back to the campsite to see what was taking his son so long to return and make sure everything was okay. He didn't see his son or any sign of him, but he did report thinking he heard his son calling for him. He was calling Dad, but Kevin never located the source of the yelling. He continued on his way, as he wasn't sure at this point if his son was missing or not yet. More than 200 searchers and volunteers would eventually scour the area well into the night and early morning hours of the following Monday, and still found no sign whatsoever that Garrett had ever been there, let alone made it back to the campsite. The following Wednesday, though, approximately 5 days after he'd gone missing, they did find a tiny piece of evidence. A single sock, Nike brand, was found in a boulder field approximately a mere half of a mile from where his father had last seen him fishing with a group. The sock appears that it was taken off of a wet foot, wadded up, very consistent with what we know about Garrett, Summit County Sheriff Dave Edmonds said. Given the area where the sock was found, Sheriff Edmonds said it lent credence to the assumption most people were making that Garrett must have sought shelter from the frigid overnight temperatures after getting lost or turned around on the trail. They believed he had perhaps gone into a boulder field or some similar type of semi-protected area so as not to be exposed to the elements, assuming he still had on wet pants and socks. Sheriff Edmonds said when the sock was initially found that the boy at that point was presumed deceased, but that they would continue their efforts, mainly in and around that specific boulder field, to try and recover either some more clues or hopefully at least his body. Garrett was last seen wearing tennis shoes, a black hoodie, a t-shirt underneath, and a pair of sweatpants. Because the distance he was meant to travel was supposed to be such a short and simple one, the 12-year-old took no backpack or provisions to get him through any length of time lost out in the wilderness. The search effort was diminished within the week and scaled back to 50 professional search and rescue personnel. They searched both by horseback and on foot. The authorities reported that they believed Garrett had become somehow and for some unknown reason disoriented on his way back to the camp, and with temperatures reaching a low of 18 degrees Fahrenheit that night, he sought shelter somewhere like a crevice or boulder field. Since bow hunting season in Utah started, the hunters have been told to be on the lookout for the boy or his body, and authorities will have hung missing posters near the trailheads. Posters were also given out to local businesses in the area in the hopes that someone will eventually come across something that will lead to the recovery of this young boy who went missing so quickly while running a fairly easy and seemingly innocent errand while out with his father and friends on a scout camping trip. Although the official search was pretty much over after the first week, Sheriff Edmonds stated, "We're never going to stop looking." Even after the official searches were called off, Garrett's family had not given up hope, and his parents, brother and sister, appeared on the Oprah show in November of 2004 to talk about Garrett and his strange and sudden disappearance. Garrett was always the kid who had the most fun. He was the one that made us laugh, said Garrett's father, Kevin Bardsley. His mother, Heidi, stated, "It's been very hard. Every day it was hard to have nightfall, to know it was one more day that we didn't find Garrett. We would have grown men that would come back to camp just in tears and say, 'I'm sorry we didn't find him today.'" Since 2004, there hasn't been a single sighting or additional shred of evidence as to the whereabouts of Garrett Bardsley. His father leaves room for the slight possibility that a mountain lion or other predator animal had gotten a hold of his son and killed him, but there are others who believe he crawled into a cave or something similar, seeking shelter from the cold weather overnight in that area. Despite it being summer, temperatures dropped significantly once the sun went down. There have been many different theories put forth as to what could have happened to this young boy. Everyone involved are in agreement about one thing. Nobody believes he is still alive, or even that he was from very shortly after he went missing. Whatever happened to him, it's believed by most that it happened by the end of the following day after he vanished. Garrett's parents told Oprah that there's never been any evidence at all that he had been abducted. They believed that it would have been nearly impossible for an abduction to have taken place. His father stated, "We were in 2.5, almost 3 miles back into rugged area. I don't blame myself so much as I wish I would have called out. I've also realized that I can't do that. It's not productive to do that to find my son. If I spent all the time doing that, I wouldn't get anything done in order to find Garrett." Searchers were off in the winter due to the inclement weather, but the family and authorities are still hopeful because of the hunters that roam about in the area, regardless of any inclement weather that may stop searchers in their tracks. Garrett's disappearance prompted several educational appearances about the perils of the wilderness and how quickly what happened to Garrett can happen to anyone, and what to do in case of an emergency out in the woods in several elementary schools in Summit County, the area in which all this took place. Garrett's family had a tradition of traveling to do what's described as humanitarian work over the Christmas holiday, and his parents stated that they were still going to honor that tradition in Garrett's name. He was looking forward to going to Ecuador to work, his father said. "We never thought we were going to be building a school at that time." He is referencing the fact that the family was planning on building a school to honor the boy while in Ecuador that season. Heidi stated that the building of the school and the work Garrett was so excited for has been helping the family heal and focus on other things. She said it's the memories of her son that get her through the most difficult times. "I've learned that I can't choose experiences I have in my life, but I can choose how I'm going to handle them. We could have let this tear our family apart, break up our marriage, but we chose to make something positive out of it." As her voice broke and tears started to flow down her cheeks, she continued with, "I know he knew that I loved him. The last time I saw him, he gave me a big hug. That's what keeps me going through this. I can still feel him squeeze me." To this day, there have been no additional clues or evidence found as to the whereabouts of Garrett, and his family still hope that he is found one way or another so they can at least know and have some closure. Next, we have the disappearance of Guy Howard Heckel. Guy Heckel was a member of Lynn County Boy Scout Troop No. 101 in early February of 1973, and he and his fellow scouts were out camping at Kiwanis Cabins, which run along the Cedar River, located between Palo and Toddville, for an overnight retreat. The troop were playing a game of Capture the Flag when 11-year-old Guy was last seen. It was Saturday the 3rd at approximately 8 p.m. when the boys were running around playing the game, and everything seemed fairly normal. During bed checks later that night, it was discovered that little Guy was missing. After an initial search by fellow troop members and the chaperones, which came up with nothing and lasted approximately 90 minutes, he was officially reported missing to the Lynn County Sheriff's Office late that same night. Reserve deputies, as well as those already on duty that night, combined with the Marion police and volunteers from the Civil Defense, searched all night through the backwater and trails, despite the ice and treacherous weather. Guy was last seen wearing a light blue nylon quilted parka, striped multicolored maroon jeans, and choco boots. The next day, Sunday, February 4th, a searcher found a blue parka, which was later identified by Guy's mother, Nancy, as belonging to him. It was still zipped at the bottom. In addition to 500 people searching by foot that day, there were all-terrain vehicles, horses, a helicopter, and a fixed-wing aircraft, all out looking relentlessly for any sign of the young man or where he could have ended up. Once it became dark on the 4th, the search was called off and resumed at first light the next day. On Monday the 5th, a bloodhound and a special search and rescue team, all the way from California, joined the now 250 others searching in hopes of finding the boy. Initially, during the trip, the weather was reported as being mild. However, very shortly after it was noticed a guy was missing, snow started to fall. Investigators initially theorized the boy could have slipped, fallen into the river, and drowned, but also said they believed something else could have happened, like foul play or some sort of human element being involved. Guy Heckel was considered a good student by his teachers. He was in the 5th grade at the time of his disappearance and lived with his parents, Nancy and Howard, as well as his 2 older sisters who were 12 and 13 years old at the time. Guy's still-zipped blue parka is to this day the only single shred of evidence ever found. Guy's cousin, Mike Mason, stated that the family believed the boy was abducted more than they believed he drowned, due mainly to the fact that his body was never recovered. It's alleged that at this time, in the early 1970s, news reports were consistently coming out accusing scout leaders of less than honorable intentions with the young boys left alone in their care. Now, the game the boys were playing, Capture the Flag, as defined by Wikipedia, is a traditional outdoor game where 2 teams each have a flag or other type of marker, and the object is to capture the other team's flag located at the team's base and bring it safely back to your own base. Enemy players can be tagged by players in their home territory. These players are then, depending on the agreed rules, out of the game. Members of the opposite team sent back to their own territory, frozen in place until freed by a member of their own team or in jail. There is a variation of this game that includes a jail area in addition to the flag on each team's territory. It's sometimes suggested that the players wear dark colors even while playing at night in order to make it harder for the opposing team members to catch a player trying to obtain the flag. At the end of the day, though, there is no proof of what the news reports were saying, at least none specifically pertinent to this case, and it was only mentioned as Guy's cousin was alleging this is the way the family was viewing the disappearance. There's been no evidence of any of the troop leaders or anyone on the camping trip that night had anything at all to do with Guy's disappearance. And by all accounts, everyone involved helped the search and investigation to the best of their ability and cooperated to the fullest. The family's reasoning stood that this game is dangerous to play while in the dark, wearing dark colors, and being made to stand alone in a dark place where you weren't allowed to move if this type of predator were in the vicinity. There is no new information on this case, and to this day, Guy's family still wonders what could have happened to him all those years ago during what was considered at the time to be a completely innocent case of a Boy Scout doing what they all did, having fun with friends and learning how to stay safe in the wilderness in cases of danger or emergency. Next up, Alvin Nelson. In September of 1961, 17-year-old Alvin Nelson was hiking in the canyons of Zion National Park in Utah with fellow troop members of his Boy Scouts. While much of what actually happened at that time is unknown, his younger sister, Dora Lee, remembers hearing something over the radio which sent chills down her spine that she would never forget. She said she was at home in Salt Lake City, Utah, in her backyard, watering the plants and listening to the radio. Suddenly, there was a report of a massive flash flood in the Narrows, which, she immediately thought, is where her brother Alvin and his best friend Frank Johnson were on their scouting trip. 5 people were swept away that tragic day, but neither the body of her brother nor his best friend were ever found. Dora Lee went on in an interview to talk about how Alvin was the man of the house, their father having left the family when they were small. It was Dora Lee, Alvin, and their mother, and they were most of the time a happy and normal family for the time. Unfortunately, their mother passed away in 1996 without ever knowing what became of her son, who was swept away apparently so long ago. Dora Lee also talked about the hope she carried with her all of that time, the time up until she finally found some semblance of an answer as to what had happened to her brother. She said over the years she would think things like, maybe something else happened, maybe they were able to get out, maybe he hit his head on something and got amnesia. Without a body, you always hope. It takes years and years before you actually believe they've got to be gone. The pain was always there. Then, 51 years later, in 2006, she finally got an answer when authorities matched DNA to a skull fragment that was found by a man swimming in the Virginia River. The DNA matched Alvin, her brother, so at least a small part of him had been found. He had in fact been swept and washed away and was simply never found for all those years. She said to the news, "It's kind of a nice birthday present, but after so many years, it really doesn't bring closure. It's been a long time." Dora Lee had turned 66 right as the news came of the DNA match, and was only about 9 at the time her brother disappeared from her and her mother's life forever. She's married now and has children of her own, which she adopted, but says there still isn't a week that does go or has gone by where she hasn't thought of her older brother and how much he is missed and loved. Springdale Police Chief Kurt Wright grew up in the area near the canyons in Utah where the flood happened that fateful day, and said the flood of '61 is legendary in that particular area. He went on to state that it was something that was always on the periphery of his mind as well. What happened to those boys, he said. Where had the bodies gone? He said when the man brought the skull piece to the police, his thoughts immediately went to the missing Boy Scouts who were swept away that day, Alvin included. He stated, "That's the only thing that's never really been solved here. We've had numerous drownings since then in the Narrows, but we've always recovered the victims." He explained that he and the local medical examiner had discussed the finding of the skull piece and what it could mean, what the implications could be for opening such old wounds. The fragment sat in the evidence room as the chief was constantly reminded of how costly DNA testing was, and that for such a small piece and no thought of exactly who it could belong to, it could end up being a waste of time and money. There it sat for all those years. He learned a while later about free DNA testing being done by the University of Texas to any law enforcement agency who may be in need of such a favor. This is when he decided the time was right and he submitted the skull fragment for testing. They were going to find out, one way or another, whether or not this had anything to do with the missing scouts. He tracked down relatives of both Alvin and Frank Johnson and then shipped it all off to the university. He received word about Frank first. It wasn't him. 2 days after that, he got the call that the DNA had matched missing Boy Scout Alvin Nelson and contacted his sister, who had given the DNA sample in the first place and was most probably waiting with bated breath for an answer, one way or another. Dora Lee planned on picking up the remains and burying them beneath a headstone purchased by her mother before she died in the event something like this should happen. Alvin, or at least some small part of him, would finally be put to rest. Chief Wright said, "It's nice to bring some closure to at least one of the families. It's a great feeling, but it was hard to deliver the news to the Johnson family. At least Dora Lee can get some closure now and move on. It's just amazing they can extract DNA from something that's been underwater for 50 years and in the sand and mud. It's been a fascinating case." Although the state has been discussing further archaeological digs in the area, most likely in an attempt to find what has happened to the rest of the still missing and simply vanished, Chief Wright is doubtful anything else will turn up. Dora Lee also stated, "You'd think after all these years it would be put to rest, but all the stress and the frustration just comes right back. I find this all very spiritual." This case just goes to show that it's never too late. And as our DNA technology becomes more advanced as each year passes, who knows what other cases we've discussed throughout the community and on this channel specifically will come to be solved. And finally, we have the bizarre disappearance of Jared Negrete. July 19th, 1991 was a day filled with excitement for 12-year-old Jared Negrete. Jared was a member of the Boy Scouts and was getting ready to embark on his first overnight backpacking trip into the wilderness. The group's leader, Dennis Knight, along with the excited group of young boys, entered the San Bernardino National Forest on July 19th and headed for Mount San Gorgonio. The group's leader, Dennis Knight, along with the excited group of young boys, entered the San Bernardino National Forest on July 19 and headed for Mount San Gorgonio. Reports indicate that the group were planning to hike to the summit of the mountain, which happens to be the tallest in Southern California. Unfortunately, the group would soon be struck by tragedy that has left Jared's family in the dark for over 30 years. At around 6 p.m., Jared fell behind the pack as they were hiking the trails and passed toward the summit. At first, his disappearance wasn't noticed as a sea of bodies walked toward the summit. Some outlets report that Jared got tired during the hike and was instructed to stay behind and wait for the group. While the truth is murky, the story of what happened next remains consistent. As the troops settled down for the night, setting up camp and placing their tents, Jared's absence was noted. Dennis Knight immediately summoned the authorities. According to Knight, the plan was to hike up the 11,500-foot mountain the next morning, with the group making a base camp at a dry lake just a few miles away from the summit. With Knight realizing that Jared was missing, a wide-scale search of the area was conducted, with local law enforcement and search and rescue agencies quickly joining in on the search. According to the Los Angeles Daily News, the search for Jared spanned over 16 days, costing around $500,000. ATVs, dog units, helicopters, local law enforcement, and search and rescue crews all scoured the land around the camp and where Jared had gone missing, but failed to find any sign of the boy. Interestingly, during their search, they did find some bizarre items that were later confirmed not to belong to Jared. They found a microwave oven, cannabis plants, a Boy Scout shirt, a backpack and a canteen, and a wallet containing $130. If these items didn't belong to Jared, who did they belong to, and why were they left abandoned in the wilderness? It seems that Jared's case has more questions than answers, even after 30 years. The 2,000-plus volunteers who took time out of their lives to help search for Jared managed to find a few clues. While searching, they found candy wrappers, beef jerky wrappers, and footprints made by Jared's shoes, as well as his backpack. Was Jared a victim of foul play, or perhaps he'd been kidnapped? Kidnapping was later ruled out, and another mysterious clue would lead some to believe that something otherworldly was involved with Jared's disappearance. During the search, Jared's camera was also found. And while most of the pictures were the local landscape, there's one photo that vividly sticks out. In the photo, Jared's eyes and nose can be seen, and some people believe that something is lurking in the background of the photo. The police theorized that Jared had taken the ominous last picture at night, and that the strange background is caused by Jared's camera flash. Unfortunately, despite logging over 40,000 man-hours in the search for Jared, no sign of him has ever been found. His parents still desperately search for the truth of what happened to their little boy. As with most unsolved disappearances, there are a plethora of theories, while the most prevailing theories believe that he either fell down a hill or embankment, or simply got lost in the park and succumbed to the elements. There are also those who believe that the bizarre and unknown forces in the national park have something to do with Jared's disappearance, as there are hundreds upon thousands of people who disappear in our national parks each year. Jared's parents believe that his body is possibly amongst boulders, rocks, and dirt, but this theory has never been confirmed. Jared's family still hold out hope that one day they will receive a phone call that their son will finally be reunited with them one way or the other. Now, the missing person epidemic not only affects just the U.S., but the UK and many other parts of the world. Thankfully, most missing people are discovered alive and well, but some cases remain cold and unsolved, whether that be for a few years or even decades. So, take a walk with me now as we explore these 6 strange cases. Number 6, Craig Freer. Craig Freer was your average 17-year-old. He was going into his senior year at high school and was the co-captain of the school's football team. Craig had also picked up a part-time job and was looking ahead to the future, and his future was bright. There were a few colleges interested in offering Craig a scholarship for his sporting abilities, and the world was truly his oyster. Unfortunately, any chance at a bright future was taken away from him one fateful day in June 2004. His sudden disappearance would turn the lives of his family upside down, and as recently as 2021, the New York State Police are still actively investigating and chasing down new leads. Craig's parents were happy when they heard he'd picked up a part-time job at the Price Chopper supermarket in Glenville, New York. Craig picked up a few shifts, which somehow he managed to fit into his busy schedule. On Sunday, June 27, 2004, Craig walked out of his home for what would be the last time. As far as his parents were concerned, he was headed to work. His mother, Veronica, had seen him carrying his uniform with him to his car. But when Veronica arrived at the supermarket where Craig worked, just a few hours after he'd left for his shift, she was shocked to find no sign of him. She was even more shocked to learn that Craig hadn't been working at the supermarket for quite some time. Whether it was shame, embarrassment, or something else that made Craig hide the fact that he got sacked, we'll never know. His parents were, of course, very upset that Craig had lied to them, and they called Craig's girlfriend to see if she knew where he was. At first, she said she had no idea, but after a second call, she caved in and admitted that he was with her. Veronica gave Craig a stern talking to, telling him that he needed to come home right away and that they needed to have a chat, a sentence that every teenager dreads hearing. Craig said goodbye to his girlfriend and left her apartment located in Scotia, New York. According to his girlfriend, she watched as he walked towards his car, but then at the last minute darted off in the opposite direction. What had scared Craig, and why had he run away from his car? Surely if he was in danger, the best thing to do would be to head to the car and drive away or go back inside. According to reports, Craig ran into the nearby woods, and this is the last confirmed sighting of him. From here, all we have are alleged sightings and a few new pieces of evidence that may finally help us piece this puzzle together. When Craig failed to return home to have a chat with his parents, they waited and waited and waited. As the hours ticked by, it eventually dawned on them that something just wasn't right. Craig was in trouble, but it wasn't like him to run away and leave without telling his parents where he was going. Some people naturally lean towards the flight side of the fight or flight feeling, but his parents knew he would have to come home at some point. But that some point never came. And by 5 p.m. that day, Veronica had picked up the phone and reported her 17-year-old son missing. It appears that the investigators weren't all too interested at first, as is the case with most missing young people. After hearing about their disagreement earlier that day, they believed that Craig just wanted time to cool off and that he would eventually come back. Unfortunately, hours turned into days, and when the investigators found that he didn't have his phone or wallet with him at the time of his disappearance, they agreed that something was wrong and began to further investigate. Those investigators found that Craig had left his wallet and $40 behind at his house, something he would have needed if he planned on spending a few days away from his family. His driver's license was also missing. However, his parents explained that it had been lost before his disappearance, and he was in the process of getting a new one. So, without money, ID, or driver's license, it was clear that Craig wouldn't have gotten very far. All he had was his car, but that had been left abandoned in the parking lot of his girlfriend's apartment complex. So, where was he? Investigators hit a big lead when interviewing witnesses from that day. A group of teenagers came forward to tell the police that they had seen Craig, or at least someone matching his description, walking along the railroad tracks behind his girlfriend's apartment complex shortly after he was seen entering the woods. It appears that they tried to engage him in conversation, but he motioned for them to be quiet and then just kept on walking. This event stuck in their mind due to the strange behavior and the bizarre nature of the incident, and it wasn't until news of his disappearance was made public that they connected the dots. Armed with this new lead, investigators began searching up and down the railway line behind Craig's girlfriend's apartment, but no sign of him was to be found. As the days pressed on and the investigation began to heat up, officers with dog units and ground teams were sent to the area where Craig was last seen. They also sent units to the Mohawk River, wondering whether he'd gotten injured and fallen in. But all of these searches turned up nothing. It seemed as if Craig had vanished into thin air, as if he were here at one moment and then gone the next. Craig's family and friends were all administered polygraph tests, and it appears that everyone passed, although, as we know, polygraph tests are a debatable technique in and of themselves and are not admissible in court in most countries. Hundreds of hours of interviews were conducted, but nothing ever came to fruition. How could a bright, promising 17-year-old just vanish into the woods? Searches continue for Craig and have done so over the years, although they have been majorly scaled back, of course. Craig's family are still desperately seeking answers, of course, and 2 years after he disappeared, the New York State Police became involved in his case. In 2021, a new lead was discovered, and investigators hope this is the clue they need. One of Craig's co-workers at the Price Chopper supermarket told investigators that sometime between June 27th and July 2nd, 2004, he saw Craig in the passenger seat of a car traveling north on Route 50 in Glenville. According to this witness, the car stopped at the traffic lights on Sheffield Road before turning left, and that's when the witness lost sight of the car. This sighting has not been confirmed as of yet. However, it is the largest piece of information in regards to Craig's whereabouts that's turned up lately. Craig's parents have never given up and are hoping that one day they will learn the truth about what happened to their son. Craig Freer is described as a white male, red hair, brown eyes, 5 foot 11 inches tall, and weighs approximately 190 pounds. He was last seen going into the woods behind the Cambridge Manor apartment complex in Scotia, New York, on June 27, 2004. When last seen, he was wearing a white short-sleeved t-shirt, blue jeans or jean shorts, white Adidas tennis shoes with 3 black stripes, and a gold chain with a St. Christopher medallion. Craig also had all 4 of his wisdom teeth removed in April 2004 and may wear his facial hair in a goatee. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the New York State Police at 518-630-1700. Number 5, Jeremy Alex. 28-year-old Jeremy Alex was doing well for himself. He and his girlfriend were in the process of moving in together in Northport, Maine, and he was working as a self-employed landscape gardener in Lincolnville, Maine. When not at work, Jeremy enjoyed skateboarding and playing the guitar, and he spent much of his young adult life traveling around the U.S. and had even gotten involved with the organization Greenpeace at one point. By all accounts, Jeremy seemed like a fun-loving free spirit who was great to be around. In April 2004, Jeremy turned 28 years old and was at a key point in his life. As previously mentioned, he and his girlfriend were getting ready to move in together, and they were excited to start this new chapter in their lives. On April 23, 2004, Jeremy's parents drove from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to his home in Lincolnville, Maine, to celebrate his 28th birthday that had just passed. They sat down for a meal, spoke about Jeremy's upcoming move, and talked about any possible plans he had for the future. Sadly, however, his parents' world would be turned upside down just 24 hours later. On April 24, 2004, the day after Jeremy's birthday dinner with his parents, Jeremy arrived at his girlfriend's house at around 11 a.m. to help her move. From the moment he arrived, she could tell that something was off. The once happy, smiling Jeremy had been replaced with a scared and paranoid person. Jeremy was very frustrated and blurted out to his girlfriend that, quote, bad people were after him. No amount of consoling or comforting could change Jeremy's mind, and he decided to leave instead of staying to help her move. This in itself was incredibly bizarre and very out of character, and the following events of that day would bring about even more questions. At around 5:20 p.m., a woman saw Jeremy running out of the woods, and the couple noticed that Jeremy was clutching money in his hand. By the time the woman had gone inside to call the police, Jeremy had broken free from her husband's grip and took off running into the woods once more. Other witnesses reported seeing a man fitting Jeremy's description on Route 1, and after this, he has never been seen or heard from again. The police quickly arrived at the scene and took statements from the husband and wife duo. The next day, Jeremy's van was found abandoned near Pound Hill Road at the Waldo County Humane Society. Inside the van were his keys and phone, but sadly, no sign of Jeremy. Searches of the woods where Jeremy's car had been found were conducted, but no sign of him could be found there either. Investigators then began interviewing his girlfriend and found out that Jeremy may have fallen into old habits. Jeremy was in recovery from drug addiction, and according to his girlfriend, in recent months he had unfortunately relapsed. Jeremy's girlfriend also stated that on the day he disappeared, he had been using illicit substances and that he had been experiencing these paranoid states for a while, and that she and his friends were concerned for him. Was Jeremy's disappearance and his ramblings about the bad men substance-related psychosis, or was someone really after him? In September of 2004, a full 5 months after Jeremy disappeared, a contractor in Jackson, Maine, reported seeing a man fitting Jeremy's description, again, coming out of the woods. According to this workman, the man he saw was acting erratically and strangely, and couldn't seem to understand what was being said to him. Apparently, this kind stranger offered the man some food, but Jeremy, if it was Jeremy, refused. There was also another possible sighting in October 2004, where someone claimed to have seen Jeremy in the woods in Owl's Head, Maine. After that, Jeremy's case went cold for another 4 years, and then in April, his case took another bizarre turn. His driver's license was found to be in the possession of a couple living in Northport, Maine, the area that Jeremy was in the process of moving to with his girlfriend. According to this couple, they had begun building their house in May of 2004, and over the years, random items that belonged to Jeremy began washing up on the shore near their house. The couple held on to the driver's license and some money that washed ashore, and it wasn't until years later that they connected the dots to Jeremy's disappearance. What's even more bizarre is that their newly constructed home is connected to the woods that Jeremy was last seen running into. Did Jeremy fall off a cliff while running in the woods, or is there something more nefarious at play? His family believes that he likely met with foul play, although they did comment that he knew how to survive in the wilderness. Jeremy Alex was last seen on April 24, 2004, running into the woods in Northport, Maine. He is described as a white male with brown hair and brown eyes, stands about 5 foot 7 inches tall, and weighed approximately 150 pounds. Investigators have stated that Jeremy did indeed appear to be under the influence and confused at the time of his disappearance. Jeremy was known to smoke hand-rolled cigarettes and was last seen wearing an olive green flannel Timberland sweatshirt, blue jeans or brown corduroy pants, tennis shoes, and carrying a red backpack. Anyone with any information regarding Jeremy's disappearance is urged to please contact the Maine State Police at 207-624-7076. Number 4, Willie Hodge. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of information surrounding the disappearance of 39-year-old Willie Hodge in January of 2019, but here's what we do know. On January 23, 2019, Willie was last seen by his family as he was leaving his home in the 1100 block of Island Drive in Sumter County, South Carolina. According to the Charlie Project, Willie had an argument or altercation with his mother and left the house upset. This was the last time he was seen by his family. Police records indicate that later that evening, Willie was pulled over at the intersection of Pinewood Road and Columbia Circle during a traffic stop. WLTX News notes that Willie was pulled over for a traffic violation, but what the violation was has never been specified. The South Carolina arrest database does show that Willie has been arrested 5 times previously before his traffic stop in 2019, with offenses ranging from burglary, larceny, driving under suspension, to possession of narcotics and assault. These arrests may or may not be linked to his disappearance. However, it may explain what happened next. As the police pulled him over, Willie jumped out of his car and ran into the woods. Did Willie have a distrust of the police because of his previous charges, or was he scared of getting yet another charge? According to officers, they searched the immediate area for Willie, but there was no sign of him. As the days passed, his car remained abandoned, and they continued in their search for the missing man. Charles Bonner, a senior investigator with the Sumter County Sheriff's Office, told News 19 in February of 2019, "We don't want to get him in trouble because of that. I just want to talk to him and make sure he's okay because he is a missing person. I take these very seriously, so I want to make sure that he's okay." There was also another person in the car with him that night he disappeared. However, this witness has been unable to provide any further information. Willie's mother, Sadie Hodge, told News 19, "In my heart, I don't feel like he's alive anymore. It's just kind of a sense of peace that I have. In a way, it's a good thing, but I still hold out hope. I just want to know he's okay, whether it's here, whether he's found eternal peace. I just want to know he's okay." Willie Hodge was last seen running into the woods after being stopped by police at the intersection of Pinewood Road and Columbia Circle in Sumter County, South Carolina. Willie is described as a white male with brown hair and brown eyes, standing 5 foot 8 inches tall and weighs 140 pounds. Willie has the letters NTAB tattooed on his knuckles, Street on the back of one arm, and Dreams on the other. He also has Thug Life tattooed across his stomach, with the name Sadie over a heart and a tattoo of a woman on his calf. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the Sumter County Sheriff's Office at 803-436-2000 or Crime Stoppers at 1-888-CRIME-SC. Number 3, Terrence Woods Jr. 26-year-old Terrence Woods Jr. was working as a TV production assistant for the UK production company Raw TV in conjunction with the Discovery Channel in 2018 and was out on location in Idaho. Unfortunately, one night while filming, Terrence ran off into the woods and hasn't been seen or heard from since. Terrence was working as part of a 12-person crew who were tasked with filming Gold Rush, Dave Turin's Lost Mine. Filming and production were going well with the crew, following Dave Turin around, seeing what he could dig up in the remote parts of the western United States. Then, on the evening of October 5th, 2018, everything changed. According to Theis, the crew had wrapped up filming for the day in Penman Mine near Oro Grande, Idaho County, when Terrence told two of the other crew members that he had to go and use the bathroom. Then, just seconds later, the associate producer, Simon G., who Terrence worked under, saw Terrence drop his radio and take off running into the trees. Terrence apparently ran down a steep cliff into a forest before disappearing into the thick woods. Those on set called out Terrence's name and desperately tried to catch up with him to see what was the matter, but the area he had apparently run into was rough and unpredictable, according to the crew. The crew spent some time searching for Terrence before realizing that they needed to call it in to the police. At 6:41 p.m., Terrence Woods Jr. was reported missing to the Idaho County Sheriff's Office. Somewhat disturbingly, the Sheriff's Office didn't arrive at the scene to begin the search for Terrence until the next morning. Their excuse was that the call was made at a late hour. This is just one of the disturbing facts surrounding Terrence's case. When the Idaho County Sheriff's Office finally arrived, they sent dog units, ATVs, helicopters, as well as boots on the ground to look for any sign of Terrence. The Idaho County Sheriff's Office found no sign of him. The dogs failed to pick up on any scent, and sadly, after 6 days, the search was called off. The Idaho County Sheriff's Office failed to act quickly in Terrence's disappearance, but they are not the only ones who acted strangely following his vanishing act. According to Valerie Woods, Terrence Jr.'s mother, the first thing Simon said on the phone, and when I met him in the police department, was, "I had high expectations for your son, but when I met him, he didn't stand up to them." Vice ran an article in 2020 about Terrence's disappearance and the allegations of the toxic work culture at Raw TV, and included an interesting detail. The article reads, quoting here, "The original Idaho County Sheriff's Office report, seen by Vice, says that Terrence was having a really hard time emotionally and had a mental breakdown earlier today. When the 911 call was made, the caller, who was not part of the Raw TV crew, alleged that Terrence had been dealing with mental issues throughout the shoot. However, when pushed to confirm these statements by Terrence's family in the weeks following his disappearance, they were retracted." End quote. This article also includes information from Terrence's mother, Valerie. She says, "He was responsible. He wouldn't run away without good reason unless he was scared." The article goes on to say, they believe Terrence felt intimidated or mistreated by his colleagues. They say that he wanted to return to his home in Maryland. An ex-Raw TV employee also told Vice there was a laddie culture at the company. There was a toxic undercurrent which made me feel very uncomfortable. There were conversations where they would make disparaging comments about people they were looking to hire. It made me feel quite uncomfortable. With all this information about Raw TV, it still remains to be seen whether they had anything to do with Terrence's disappearance. As of 2020, the Idaho County Sheriff's Office said that Terrence's case is still open but not active, and that they are not actively searching for him. Terrence Woods Jr. was last seen running into the woods near Oro Grande in Idaho County, Idaho, on October 5, 2018, after telling two colleagues that he needed to use the bathroom. Terrence is described as an African-American male with black hair, brown eyes, 5 foot 9 inches tall, and 150 pounds. Terrence has a tattoo of a black oval on the inside of his left wrist and was last seen wearing a light brown jacket and black cargo pants. Anyone with any information is urged to please contact Lieutenant Jerry Johnson of the Idaho County Sheriff's Office at 208-983-1100 and reference case 1810081. Number 2, Lars Mittank. The case of Lars Mittank is perhaps one of the most perplexing disappearances in recent true crime history, and while there are numerous theories surrounding his mysterious disappearance, we are still no closer to uncovering the truth of what happened in 2014. On June 30th of that year, 28-year-old Lars Mittank and a group of his friends traveled from their home in Germany to the Golden Sands Resort in Varna, Bulgaria. This was the perfect party destination for 28-year-old Lars and his friends, and parts of Bulgaria have picked up a reputation over the years for being party hotspots for young European tourists. The sun is blazing, drinks are cheap, and clubs are open all night long, making it the perfect place for young people to go and let their hair down, and that's exactly what Lars and his friends did. The first few days of the holiday went by without incident, with the group soaking up the sun and enjoying everything that the Golden Sands Resort had to offer. Then on July 6th, just a day before they were due to head home, something strange happened. While out at a bar, Lars got into an argument with a rival football fan. Lars was a Werder Bremen fan, while the other person was a Bayern Munich fan. In Europe, they take football very seriously, and for some it's more of a religion than a sport, so it isn't surprising to hear that the argument became heated very quickly. The argument was dissipated after harsh words were thrown around, and Lars left the bar first without his friends. His friends figured that he was likely heading back to the hotel and that they would be able to catch up with him later. It was until the next morning, however, that Lars returned to the hotel room with a ruptured eardrum and an injured jaw. According to reports, his friends gave investigators differing accounts of what had happened that night. Some of his friends said that after Lars left the bar, the men that he had been arguing with earlier jumped him, causing the injuries, while others claimed that the men in the bar had paid a local man to do their dirty work for them. Either way, Lars was left with a pretty serious injury that would kickstart a bizarre chain of events. His friends took him to see a doctor at the airport who confirmed that his eardrum had ruptured and he would not be able to fly until it was healed. Lars was given 500 milligrams of cefprozil to help curb infection and was advised to remain in Bulgaria for a few days. His friends rallied around him, insisting that they would stay with him until he was cleared to fly. But oddly, Lars declined their offer. He insisted that he would be okay on his own, telling them to go ahead, fly back to Germany, and that he would see them again very soon. There were no indications of what was to come, and the events of the next few days would shock everyone. Lars checked himself into another hotel and remained there for just one night. Employees at the hotel reported he was acting very bizarrely and seemed as if he was paranoid and scared of someone or something. During his short stay at the second hotel, Lars also called his mother. In a hushed voice, he panically told her that 4 men were after him. His mother would later tell investigators that the fear in his voice was very real and no amount of consoling would calm him down. After a very restless night's sleep, Lars returned to Varna Airport on July 8, 2014, and visited the office of Dr. Kosta Kostov. Lars' hopes of returning home were dashed, however, when Dr. Kostov reiterated that given his condition, it would not be in his best interest to fly. But Lars decided to ignore this recommendation. He told the doctor that he was willing to accept responsibility for whatever happened to him. Just as the appointment was wrapping up, a construction worker entered the room. Varna Airport was undergoing a lot of construction and renovation work at the time, and it's likely that the construction worker had simply wandered into the wrong room. This situation was more of an annoyance than anything else, but for Lars, it freaked him out. His whole demeanor changed when the man entered the room, and he exclaimed, "I don't want to die here. I need to get out of here." With that, Lars ran out the door of the doctor's office, leaving behind his luggage and bags, and made a beeline for the entrance of the airport. This bizarre escape was captured on CCTV and became the most infamous piece of evidence we have in Lars' case. The CCTV footage shows Lars running, almost as if he's running for his life, through the airport, into the parking area, and then jumping over a fence and running near Highway A2. When Lars failed to return home and make contact with his family, he was reported missing and an investigation was opened. His friends were questioned and the CCTV footage was heavily reviewed. Lars had been exhibiting bizarre paranoid behavior in the days leading up to his disappearance, and investigators began to wonder whether this paranoia was founded upon truth. As previously stated, Lars had gotten into an argument and been beaten up on July 6, 2014. Was someone really after him, or was it the head injury, possibly combined with the medication that he was prescribed, that induced this paranoia? The antibiotic cefprozil is known to cause hallucinations and paranoia. His family said that he had never exhibited signs of mental illness before his trip, and when his friends boarded their flight home, they said he seemed happy and was in a good mood. Despite numerous investigations, the disappearance of Lars Mittank remains unsolved. His mother, Sandra, told Crime and Investigation, "There's a good chance he'll come back. He just needs my help." Lars Mitank was last seen running out of the Varna airport in Varna, Bulgaria on July 8, 2014. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the BKA, which is the Federal Criminal Police Office in that country, at 49151-613-78673. Or as an alternative, you can contact the Varna Police directly at 359-52-611-516. Number 1. Dennis Shepard. 46-year-old Dennis Shepard was described as an energetic and lively person who loved his girlfriend and his family. Dennis worked as a personal assistant in Port Washington, New York, and was doing well in his career and his private life. That was until a sudden onset of paranoia sent Dennis down a dark path. He became convinced that everyone he knew was working with the FBI to conspire against him. One day, Dennis's paranoia boiled over. Dennis was witnessed running door to door asking neighbors to call the United Nations because he wanted to report the conspiracy against him. Dennis told those who opened their doors that his family, neighbors, lawyers, and others in his life were involved in an FBI conspiracy to get him, and that he needed help. This alarmed neighbors, who called the police, and Dennis was involuntarily taken into the Stony Brook University Hospital's psychiatric unit for observation and treatment. During his time in the hospital, Dennis was still convinced that there was an FBI conspiracy against him, and even believed that the officers who had taken him in and the staff who were treating him were in on the conspiracy, and that's why he had been taken in. In reality, Dennis had been taken in for his own safety and well-being, but his paranoia had grown too much and he was unable to make rational decisions. Dennis repeatedly told the staff at Stony Brook, "I want to see how I do without medications," and that he would not be taking medications under any circumstances. He did not believe that anything was wrong, and the hospital was in the process of filing a court order to ensure that Dennis would have to take his medication and get the therapy and help he needed. On May 18th of 2012, Dennis was being transported to the Pilgrim Psychiatric Center for further treatment. He intended to fight the court order once he arrived at the psychiatric center, but he would never make it. According to staff who were traveling with Dennis that day, he simply jumped out of the car and ran off into the woods, never to be seen again. Oddly enough, his disappearance was not reported by medical staff until several hours later, and the Suffolk County Police Department were extremely hesitant to get involved. It became clear that the Suffolk County Police Department did not take Dennis's disappearance seriously, despite the fact that he had been taken into psychiatric care and his notes stated that he was suffering from delusions and possibly schizophrenia. The Suffolk police rested on the idea that Dennis had run away and was hiding from the police, although he had no real reason to do so. Disturbingly, no golden alert, which is for a missing vulnerable adult, was issued when Dennis disappeared, a fact that has greatly angered his family. These alerts have been proven to save lives and have been used in different iterations across countless states. Had a golden alert been issued, the outcome of Dennis' story may have been a lot different than the outcome I'm telling you now. The Pilgrim Psychiatric Center sits across from the Oak Brush Plains State Reserve, a sprawling park of over 813 acres. Is it possible that Dennis ran through the woods and made his way into this reserve? Since his disappearance, little progress has been made in this case, and his family has since filed a $5 million lawsuit against the Stony Brook Institution for allowing Dennis to escape. In March of 2021, a Reddit user named Always Sunny in Upstate made a post about Dennis's disappearance, and the post received an interesting comment. The commenter, who claimed to be Victoria Shepard, Dennis's sister, gave some further insight into her brother's case. She wrote, and I'm quoting here, "This is Victoria Shepard. I am his sister. The police have been of no help at all. He is still missing. His dental records and our mom and another sister's DNA is on record. They did not even alert the police until several hours after he went missing. He was a limo driver and avid bike rider, so he knows Long Island very well. He lived in Nassau County when he went missing, and we lived in Suffolk for many years. He really could be anywhere, but we know no activity on bank accounts, credit cards, or social security number, so that makes us lose hope. Hopefully, one day he will be found. His family misses him terribly, especially his mom. She's been heartbroken since the day he went missing." End quote. Dennis Shepard was last seen running into the woods near the Pilgrim Psychiatric Center in Brentwood, New York, on May 18th of 2012. Dennis is described as a white male with blonde hair and blue eyes, stands about 6 feet tall, and weighed approximately 190 pounds. Dennis may be suffering from schizophrenia, and at the time of his disappearance, he was suffering from paranoid delusions. He was last seen wearing a black t-shirt, tan pants, and tan tennis shoes. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Steve Gargans of the Suffolk County Police Department at 631-852-6110 and reference case number 12-309678. Well, friends, there you have it. What do you think of this half dozen strange cases where people disappeared after running into the woods? Very strange indeed. Hello, friends. Today we're going to be talking about 5 wilderness disappearances where mysterious disembodied cries for help were heard by search and rescue teams, but the person couldn't be located. You can imagine how these disembodied cries for help would have baffled search and rescue teams when they couldn't locate the missing person who had vanished in the wilderness. Likewise, the person calling out would probably wonder why they couldn't be heard. As we all know, thousands of people go missing every single day in the United States alone, and while some are found safe and sound and return to their family and loved ones, many are never seen or heard from again. How devastating that must be for the people who remain in the dark about their loved one, wondering always what if and what happened. Are they alive? Are they deceased? But what about the people who went missing and are known to have called out for help, to have actually been heard screaming or yelling for someone to rescue them, but were then never found? How does something like that even happen? Surely you must be thinking that if someone is close enough to be within earshot and heard calling for help, then search and rescue teams, volunteer teams, or even just a random stranger wandering about in the area heard them, then how's it at all possible for that person to never be seen or heard from again? Now, while we don't answer to that specific question today, and we as a society may never have all of or even part of the answers to these same questions, let's review some of these cases today. The ones in which people were so very close to being rescued or saved, but then that help never came. What must that have felt like to the person who was lost? Crying out and then hearing people who you think are coming to your aid for who knows how long, knowing that you're being heard and maybe even preparing to get ready to get back home to your family, and then nothing. Search and rescue teams or volunteers move on, possibly walking right past you to go and continue the search for you somewhere else. These are just a few of the many cases we found in which people were actually heard calling for help but then could not be located. They were never seen or heard from again after that. Number 5, Mitchell Dale Stalling. On June 19, 2013, Mitchell Dale Stalling, known to most as Dale, his wife Deneen, and his parents went to Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado, USA. The 51-year-old Dale decided to go for a hike by himself to the Spruce Tree House Ruins. The Spruce Tree House Ruins is the 3rd largest cliff dwelling in Mesa Verde and was actually constructed between 1211 and 1278 AD by the ancestors of some of the Pueblo people of the Southwest. This amazing dwelling contains about 130 rooms and 8 kivas, which are chambers where the ceremonies of the Pueblo people were held. This dwelling wasn't discovered until 1888 when 2 ranchers were trying to find some cattle that had gone astray and accidentally stumbled upon this beautiful piece of history. Dale had decided he wanted to see it for himself and took off at around 4:30 p.m. with every intention of returning as soon as he was done. After all, the trail was less than a quarter of a mile long, connecting to the Petroglyph Point Trail, which is a 2.5-mile loop with cliff exposure that takes off right from the Spruce Tree Trail. Several witnesses came forward later and remembered speaking with Dale on the trail that day, but yet he never returned back to his family. It was until 7 years later that his remains were found and returned to his still hopeful and still searching family on September 17, 2020. But now let's talk about the mystery surrounding this horrible tragedy. Here's a little more about what happened to Dale Stalling that fateful day back in June of 2013. Dale and his family left their home in Goliad, Texas in a camper trailer and headed west to Colorado, a place Dale had always wanted to see and explore. He was an experienced outdoorsman and loved to camp and hike, and was also a very avid gardener and was known to spend hours alone at home, just spending time and tending to his many plants. He decided a day trip to Mesa Verde National Park was the perfect way not only for his family to spend some quality time together, but also for him to make his dream of seeing the sights in the beautiful Colorado National Park a reality. And so, they were on their way. The trail was known to be a bit rough and rugged, so initially the Stallings were only planning to drive to the lookout point and experience the breathtaking scenes from a distance. Dale's parents were elderly, and it's reported that his wife was overweight, so nobody but Dale would have been able to hike the trail very easily. Once they got there, however, Dale being Dale and having his great love of nature and the outdoors, decided to seize the moment and finally have the opportunity he had waited for so long, to be there in Colorado, in the Mesa Verde. He just had to get a closer look at the spruce tree house ruins. 22 minutes before Dale took off for his hike, the weather conditions were not that good. The temperature was somewhere between 90 and 100 degrees. The terrain was another worry, as it was rugged with steep canyons and mesa tops. The elevation ranged from 6,500 to 8,000 feet. The hike to the top of the trail, Dale estimated, would take about an hour. This was the average length of time for someone in good health to have made it through. Dale was reported missing very soon after he didn't return at the agreed-upon time. His family didn't want to leave much room for anything bad to have happened and got on to finding him right away. The Rangers first thought Dale had just gotten probably a bit off track and told his wife to give him a few more hours, and if he didn't return by then, to go ahead then and report him missing. According to a park public information officer, the park has never had anyone go missing for more than a couple of hours. Once it had indeed been 2 hours after he was supposed to have been back, the park initiated a 2-week-long search and rescue operation, which included around 60 searchers, 2 dog teams, helicopter surveillance, and rope teams rappelling off the cliffs in the Chapin Mesa area. This is where the canine teams had initially shown some interest in the first couple of days of the search, so this is where they decided to begin. The Petroglyph Point Trail follows a cliff base before descending to the mesa in a series of steep sections of switchbacks, which then had some steps cut into the rock. Though he didn't have any water with him on this extremely hot day when he disappeared, Dale did have his cell phone. But after he was determined to have disappeared, nobody could get any kind of response or an answer from him when they tried to reach out. Phone records did show him trying to access his voicemail at around 7 p.m. that night, or at least the phone was trying to access the voicemail. We in this community should make no assumptions that it was Dale at all who tried to do this. For the sake of fact, though, let's move on and say it was him. It was for nothing, though, as the call dropped and never went through. According to Patrick O'Driscoll of National Parks Media Services, the Intermountain region, the majority of Mesa Verde, aside from the few marked trails, is uncharted territory, and therefore technically off-limits to hikers. Approximately 5 to 10 people go missing every year in the Mesa Verde National Park, and none of these cases are officially closed, including Dale's, until that person or their body is found. Authorities have shared everything from actual case files to random tips with the family, but Dale's wife, Deneen, sees things much differently than park officials do. She says she is pissed off and feels the search only really lasted for 2 days, and then Dale was just given up on. She stated, "Now that it's been a year, and honestly, the more I reflect on it, I'm just pissed off." Their attitude was, he was there, he was lost, and what are they supposed to do about it? Park officials say, however, that rangers in the park were still searching for Dale 3 months later, though in a bit more scaled-back way. They insist they did this to keep Dale and his disappearance on their radar, so everyone would continue to be on the lookout for him. In 2014, Deneen returned at least 14 times to the park, and is more convinced than ever that her husband had gone missing due to misleading markers and signs in the park, which caused him to accidentally go off trail. She believes he thought he was following all the signs properly, but because they were so confusing, he ended up lost anyway. There is a very interesting account written by a hiker and writer named Jody Peterson, however, that was written in 2013, which details an experience she had while hiking the same trail on the same day as Dale when he went missing. She writes in part, "After an hour of walking, I suddenly heard a weary male voice call, 'I need some help.' I thought of the missing hiker. Perhaps after visiting Spruce Treehouse, he'd attempted the trail and run into trouble. I called out several times, but got no response. I thought about going off trail to look, but figured then I'd become victim number 2 if I tried to scramble down those ledges and cliffs. My cell phone had no signal. I hiked back down the trail as fast as I could, and when I found the chief ranger, I told him what I'd heard. Relief washed over his face as another staffer said, "We thought we heard a call for help in that area yesterday." They quickly began planning to bring in dogs and more searchers. I left the ranger station and stood looking at the opposite side of the canyon where I'd heard the call for help. I said a silent prayer. When I got back to my western Colorado home the following day, I checked the news thinking that I'd read that the hiker had been found. Instead, I learned that Mitchell Dale Stalling was still missing, and now 70 people were looking for him. As I write this, it's been almost 2 weeks since Stalling vanished, and the search has been scaled down. A group of us think he's still somewhere in the park, said Chief Ranger Jesse Farias. We've all heard of planned disappearances, but it doesn't smell that way. The odds of him being found alive, though, are basically zero. Perhaps he fell between big rocks in a place where searchers can't see him. Perhaps wind shifts made the dog miss his scent. Now, the question, though, is this. If Dale was heard calling for help by several different people, and searches were immediately put into place and conducted as soon as this was reported, then how did no one come across him again, even hear him again, or find any evidence of him at all? If they thought they heard a call for help in the same area just the day before, then why weren't they still out searching there? That makes no sense. What really happened out there in Mesa Verde? Do the park rangers and other staff of this national park know more than they're saying? This is something to think about, definitely, but most likely something we will never find an answer to. Number 4, Daylene Moke Pua. On February 27, 2015, a 17-year-old named Daylene Pua, known as Moke to his family and friends, decided to go for a hike on the Stairway to Heaven. This is actually the Haiku Stairs in Oahu, Hawaii. These stairs are basically an extremely steep step structure which used to provide pedestrian access to former U.S. Navy communication facilities on the island. This is considered one of Hawaii's most dangerous trails, and Moke was last seen boarding a bus in Waianae to get to the spot which he wanted so badly to climb and see the historical sites. Daylene, who lived on the Big Island, was visiting Waianae to spend some time with his grandmother. His grandmother, Martha Bear, stated that the teen wanted desperately to climb the trail, which is forbidden on the windward side of Oahu. She told her grandson she had seen on the news that it was closed down and he wouldn't be able to access it. She told him not to waste his time even trying. Martha said, though, that when Daylene boarded the bus and said he was going hiking, she never thought he was really going there, to the Stairway to Heaven trail. She figured she'd already told him that he would get arrested if he tried to go there and climb, and that it was closed down and pedestrian access was being refused. At around 11 a.m., Daylene posted his last ever correspondence when he texted some friends pictures of himself, stating that he was finally there, on the trail of the Haiku Stairs, and was next planning to climb them. He hasn't been seen or heard from since. His family studied the pictures Daylene had sent them from the trail right before he seemingly disappeared into thin air extensively, and there are some that stand out. These are the ones they are desperately trying to get the public's help in identifying. Unfortunately, the more you blow up the images, the more blurry and non-discernible they become. Almost impossible to tell what you're even looking at. Though the family is fairly confident at least one of them is Daylene. They believe they saw a man in the background, far off in the distance of at least one of the other pictures, and theorized that this man was for some reason following Daylene and could have somehow led to his disappearance and possible demise. The search effort included local fire departments, drone operators, community volunteers, and even the U.S. Navy, conducting a land and air search to find the young man, all to no avail. A few days after he was last heard from and reported as missing, Monday, March 2nd, 2 hikers reported hearing cries for help. This information led the fire department to continue their search into Tuesday, March 3rd, 2015. That particular search was suspended the same afternoon, but local volunteers continued to look for Daylene, combing through the mountains, but finding no sign of him. The Haiku Stairs have been closed to the public since 1987, but are still a very popular hike with locals and tourists alike willing to risk fines or arrest. The stairs are in bad shape after heavy rains and powerful storms have damaged them to the point that they've gained a somewhat ominous reputation for being not only treacherous, but possibly deadly as well. Some people believe they should be fixed, restored, and reopened to the public, while others say they should be torn down altogether. The fate of Daylene Moke Pua is still unknown to this day, as is why he wasn't found despite hikers very clearly hearing him calling for help. Was this actually Daleen Pua crying out for help? Again, we will most likely never know. Number 3, Philip Krasik. Yet another unfortunate soul who decided to go out for what seemed like a pleasant and scenic hike and ended up not ever being seen or heard from again, even after being heard screaming or yelling for help, is 30-year-old Philip Krasik from Berkeley, California. Philip told his wife he was headed out for a run in the hills near the Mahler Ranch staging area in Pleasanton Ridge Regional Park, California. He called her once he reached the trail to inform her that it would take him about an hour and to let her know when she could expect him back that day. He was last seen running at around 10:45 a.m. that same morning. Philip's wife reported him missing the same afternoon he had headed out for the run when he failed to return home and hadn't been in contact with her or anyone else to let them know why he wasn't back yet. This was very unlike him by all accounts. Investigators in Pleasanton stated that they had never come across such a bizarre case. Either he got hurt and was only able to call out, or he planned all of this and purposely disappeared, leaving his wife and his life behind and never looking back. This left his family and friends to wonder forever what happened to him and why. According to his family, the latter isn't even an option, as Philip just wasn't that type of man and loved his life and his family. Philip was supposed to meet with his wife to attend a family gathering in Stockton, California. When he didn't show up at the appointed time, his wife immediately knew something was wrong and called the authorities. Philip was said to have left his shirt and cell phone in his vehicle, and although he was running with a smartwatch, it was unfortunately not equipped with GPS. With temperatures rising above 100 degrees Fahrenheit that day in Pleasanton, many were led to immediately begin to speculate that the heat had somehow incapacitated Philip on that day, July 10th, 2021. Now, this didn't make much sense to his family and loved ones, though, as Philip was a marathon runner and was well adjusted to running under such extreme conditions as blaring heat, which might incapacitate most people. His cell phone showed that his route was planned out entirely along very well-maintained and manicured trails. Though the park was packed with people that day, not a single credible sighting of Philip has ever been reported. Sergeant Aaron Fountain of the Pleasanton Police Department, who's handling the investigation, said, "I can't even speculate on this one. It's very, very odd." Now to continue, Philip Krasik was a family man with 2 small children and also a graduate of the prestigious Harvard University in Boston, Massachusetts. He was also listed as a third-year student in MIT's Urban Mobility Lab. Philip went missing on a Saturday, and the following Wednesday, a family hiking in the area reported hearing cries in a canyon near the Sunol Post Office. After receiving this tip, 2 people who were involved in the search went out to the area and heard for themselves a man screaming for help near the canyon. Experienced hikers in the search and rescue effort set out to go and see if they could hear the calls and perhaps follow them to try and find Philip, who they presumed it was, and bring him safely back to his family. However, once arriving at the spot where the cries for help were allegedly heard by multiple people at this point, they heard nothing and weren't able to locate Philip either. That same night, the search efforts were officially called off, and Philip hasn't been found as of this video being made, almost a month later. Theories run wild as to what happened to Philip Krasik. From demented and murderous drug dealers taking him hostage, to large felines somehow carrying him up trees and feasting, to him just walking off and abandoning his life, which he was said to love so much. However, that's just what these are, theories, as there hasn't been any evidence as to if this was definitely Philip who was heard crying from the canyon for help that fateful day. Again, why didn't the first 2 experienced hikers who were sent out and did claim to have heard at least someone crying for help never find him? This is another case that is completely and totally baffling and runs along the exact vein as the previous 2 and the cases to follow. We'll never know. Surely, if he was attacked and eaten by wild animals, there would have been some sort of trail for either the animal searchers or even the human ones to find and follow, at least leading to some sort of explanation. Signs of a struggle, blood, torn clothing, etc. We'll just have to wait and see on this one. Do have an update here. While this video was in editing, Philip was found deceased. We'll create a new case update video very soon to discuss this with you. Philip, rest in peace, my friend. Number 2, Linda Ortega. On September 22, 2012, 53-year-old Linda Ortega left her home in Blackwell, Oklahoma, and headed out to the woods in the Arkansas Ozarks near St. Joe. Linda was with her brother, and they were visiting with her sister when, somewhat ironically, her brother offered to take her into the woods and teach her some survival skills. She somehow became separated from him and ended up lost in the woods for 5 days. The story she told of her experience is strange to say the least. However, in this community, if you clicked on this video or you're aware of all the strange things happening in the woods, besides all the bizarre deaths and disappearances, and if you've been paying attention at all and can clearly see something is wrong with not only the things mentioned above, but also with the reports and stories of encounters and experiences had by the people who were lost for however long in whatever part of the 700 million acres of forest and woodlands in the United States alone, then you'll understand why it was absolutely necessary that we tell Linda's story here. Now, as soon as she was reported missing, a search was mounted, and almost every single resident of St. Joe, which is a tiny town of not even 200 people, and various other volunteers from throughout the county, set out to find the missing woman. She was eventually found, relatively unharmed, and picked up by an all-terrain vehicle driven by some of these volunteers. Linda was lucky enough to have only sustained some minor cuts and bruises, but what happened to her affected her psychologically, and it was definitely a strange story she had to tell. Chief Deputy Dwayne Pierce stated that when she came out of the woods, she wasn't right about her head. That's a quote. Miss Ortega reported that she had survived by eating wild berries, watercress, hazelnuts, and anything else she could find which she knew was edible. She also drank water from the creek. At night, she huddled on the freezing cold ground underneath trees for shelter, praying for someone to come and finally find her. She also repeatedly thanked her brother and insisted she never would have survived without the knowledge he had just been teaching her about how to survive in the wild. The strangest and scariest part of the entire 5-day ordeal, though, was what Linda said she had experienced while out there, lost and alone, cold and afraid, in the unknown woods and trails. She claimed that while she was out there, especially at night, she would see other people there. They would be walking around her along the trails or even right there in the thick of the woods. She would ask them for help or try to get their attention, maybe even ask one of them if they could point her in the direction of safety. However, not a single one of these people even acknowledged her or looked in her direction. She claimed people were even hiding behind the bushes like they didn't want her to see them. Now, while in the hospital, she did admit that perhaps some of the berries she had eaten caused some kind of mild hallucination. She wasn't sure. She claimed she had managed to stay with her brother for 3 days before becoming separated from him and knew what she should and what she shouldn't eat when trying to survive. She's very consistent in her story. Think about the people hiding in the bushes. These people definitely weren't part of any kind of search party. Why would people trying to find a lost woman hide so she couldn't see them? More than that, why would others walk right past her and then try and hide as though they were playing some kind of strange hide-and-seek game, hiding in plain sight? Is this finally the proof that there are, in fact, strange people who live in the woods who either don't know how to interact with other people or just don't want to? Especially other people who aren't like them or who aren't from where they're from. Is this proof of ferals, wild men? How does this all tie in with strange missing person cases and even deaths we see, which are becoming so much more common year after year in the woods? Is this what we should be paying attention to when out searching for the above-mentioned missing? There was a statement made by the doctor Linda saw after being taken to the hospital when she was rescued, which validates her sanity. She was not insane. How much more interesting that she was berry picking when she ended up being separated from her brother after 3 days of staying right next to him. As we all know, this is a very common theme among the missing people in the woods, the berry picking, or berry patches in general. But there are those who are found, and then those who seem to be forever lost. Linda is not the first person, or more specifically, the first woman, to report things like this while either lost or, for whatever reason, wandering the woods alone. There are many other reports of women being followed or even chased by what they referred to as men while being lost in those same woods. This is also very common in the East along the Appalachian Trail. Think back to the story of little Dennis Martin and how a family out for a hike or camping trip saw what they referred to as a wild man carrying something which looked like a small child over its shoulder. There are also several park rangers in the United States, Dwight McCarter among them, who have come forward since retiring and tell stories of wild men living and even hunting in the woods of our national parks and general forested areas of our country. Is this only going on here in the United States, though? Not at all. There's one specific report we covered in an early video about wild men and feral humans in the woods, where at least one park ranger was attacked by one of these people. Now, luckily, Linda was able to keep her wits about her despite what must have been petrifying fear, and she made a full recovery after her harrowing ordeal. Number 1, Naomi Lee Whidden. On November 25, 1994, Dwayne Whidden decided to take his son, age 6, and 2 daughters, ages 2 and 3, for a hike in the Chattahoochee National Forest. He parked the car at the base of a large mountain there at the trailhead, unloaded his children, and off they went for a day of family fun together. Dwayne and his 3 kids hiked about 1.5 miles up an old logging trail and into the deep wilderness of the forest. Later on, when recounting the incident of what happened and how Naomi had come to be lost in the woods, he stated, "They, meaning his children, were in my full view, my sight and hearing, and then she was gone." He stated that they were all looking for signs of animals when suddenly Naomi, only 2 years old, just simply vanished. There was never any explanation we could find of what actually happened and how it was possible a 2-year-old little girl, in full view of her father no less, disappeared faster than he could finish blinking. It's like she blinked right out of existence. Local authorities brought in bloodhounds and search teams from the surrounding counties to aid in the search for the small girl. Teams of volunteers and search and rescue headed out well into the middle of the night looking for Naomi and calling her name, but to no avail. She was seemingly nowhere at all. Now, approximately 25 hours after she first disappeared, a man named Kip Clayton was searching the outer fringes of the search area he and his team were assigned to when he said his intuition, that old gut instinct, pushed him forth to go and search another 250 yards forward, leaving the official search area he was looking in. But that's when he found her. Laying next to a large log, face down and unresponsive in mud, muck, and leaves, was 2-year-old Naomi Whidden. He picked her up and she let out a small moan. She was freezing cold, her body at a dangerously low temperature, and Kip ran as fast as he could with Naomi barely breathing in his arms, the approximate mile back to the command post. Naomi was rushed to the nearest hospital, and she was only semi-conscious and in very critical condition when she arrived. Now, while eventually she fully recovered and managed to survive her ordeal, many questions remain about what exactly happened to her. As mentioned before, where Naomi was found was only about 250 yards away from where the searchers would have been screaming and yelling her name the night before, all throughout the night. Why didn't Naomi respond to them at all? Why didn't she alert them in any way as to where she was so they could go and help her? It isn't possible that she was face down in the mud the entire time, or she couldn't have survived. Surely she would have suffocated. So why didn't she respond? Did she not hear them? If she couldn't hear them, why not? Take into account when trying to understand these things, how close this disappearance was to the Great Smoky Mountains, and how many children not only have disappeared there, but were found face down on the ground. Usually, the ones closest to Naomi's age are found this way. Sometimes, though, it's too late. Naomi was very lucky to have survived. Also, why doesn't a simple Google search turn up more information about this case? Other than one document, there's not any mention of this online anywhere. So, friends, what do you think of these strange cases? People that heard calling out couldn't be located, or people that couldn't hear the searchers calling for them. Very, very strange.
He flat out told us, "Mom, she's dead, she needs our help." And that's when I got the goosebumps and I was like, oh my gosh. He was just in our car and he was pointing out to a certain spot in the meadow.
While Victoria Gorba and her family stopped for lunch, her son Caden began talking to someone.
And my husband and I kind of looked at each other like, what? And he goes, yeah, there's a lady over in the meadow in a black shirt. And I got goosebumps. He says, she needs our help, but she's dead. And she's laying face down with her legs up. And she can't talk to me, but she's over there. We need to go help her.
Jake and Victoria checked out the meadow, but saw nothing.
He kept saying, trust me, Mom. And I was like, I trust you, bud. You know, I believe you 100%.
Spooked, the couple decided to end the trip early and head home.
And we put it on Facebook, seeing if anybody knew anything about the area, and come to find out that there was a lady missing with the description that he described to us within a 5-mile radius of where we were.
Sandra Hughes had gone missing in July of 2020. Caden had described her in detail and recognized her in 3 of 4 photos.
He was very adamant that we needed to help her, and he described down to blue hair. He said she has a black shirt, blue jeans, and blue hair, Mom.
And the sheriff said
that's the exact description of her when she went missing.
Hello, friends. We recently learned of what may be one of the strangest updates to a missing person case that we've ever brought forth. Now, sometimes in these missing person cases that we cover, there will be a little bit of a paranormal or supernatural element. It's usually something small and not very significant to the overall case, but sometimes it seems that the unknown can play a larger part in these cases. Stories of UFOs, the Fae, Bigfoot or other cryptids, portals, translucent entities, etc. But is it possible that the ghost of a missing woman may be trying to help solve her disappearance, or at least help locate her remains? We ask that you keep an open mind and consider the following case. Back in episode number 7 of our 10 Unsolved National Park Disappearances series, we brought you the story of Sandra Hughes. To recap, 54-year-old Sandra Johnson Hughes of California was last heard from on June 26, 2020. Sandra had embarked on a solo camping trip in the Sierra south of Yosemite to escape from the current pandemic. Sandra had recently moved from Maui, Hawaii to California in June of 2020. She had trained to be a park ranger in college and was experienced in the outdoors. On July 5th of that year, the Madera County Sheriff's Office asked for the public's help in locating Sandra after they found her campsite near the Johnson's Meadow section of the forest in disarray. On that same day, the authorities located Hughes' silver Saab in Chiquito Creek to the north of the campsite. They said it appeared to have crashed into a tree at a speed of less than 20 miles per hour before rolling into the ravine. Hikers reported seeing Sandra on July 4th, 2020, and said she was barefoot and had a bruise on her face. They offered to help her, but she declined medical assistance. Officers and volunteer search and rescue teams from more than half a dozen other sheriff's departments, together with dog teams, the California Highway Patrol, and the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, combed the forest on foot, while helicopters from California Air National Guard did an aerial search. The search focused around the area where her car was found, but there was no sign of Sandra. Then on August 9th, 2020, 2 hunters saw a woman leaning against a tree along Road 5S01 near Beasore Road. She did not wave them down, attempt contact, or appear to be in any distress. Upon returning, they recognized her from a missing persons flyer and contacted park rangers. The hunters said that she appears to be visibly thinner than her last known photos. At the time of her disappearance, Sandra was a 54-year-old white female with blue shoulder-length hair. Her natural color is brown. She has brown eyes, is approximately 5 foot 3 inches tall, and weighs about 150 pounds. The search for Sandra was ongoing but limited. Now, flash forward to almost exactly 1 year later. This strange update to the case comes from the Madera County Sheriff's Office in Madera, California. It seems that a family from nearby Coarsegold, California, experienced a bizarre broad daylight ghost sighting in the Madera County mountains on Wednesday, July 21st, 2021. The event was so strange and disturbing that the Madera County Sheriff's Office felt the need to further investigate. It seems that a man named Jake Gorba, his wife Victoria, and their 3 children decided to take their 4-wheeler up to the Shut-Eye Peak on that fateful Wednesday. While on this family outing, they stopped to have something to eat beside the trail, and that's when things started to get strange. The couple's 3-year-old son, Caden, suddenly began animatedly talking to someone nearby. He was just in our 4-wheeler, and he was pointing out to a certain spot in the meadow, said his mom, Victoria. The normally reserved and somewhat quiet Caden excitedly told his parents that there in the meadow by where the family was having lunch was a woman lying face down with her legs straight up in the air. Furthermore, Caden stated that the woman was unable to speak or move and needed help. He began pleading with his parents to help this poor woman. He flat out told us, "Mom, she's already dead, but she needs our help." And that's when I got the goosebumps. I was like, "Oh my gosh," Victoria said. He goes, "Yeah, there's a lady over in the meadow in a black shirt, blue jeans, and blue hair." And I got goosebumps, said Victoria. He says, "She needs our help, but she's dead and she's lying face down with her legs up. She can't talk to me, but she's over there. We need to go help her." So, in order to calm young Caden down, Jake and Victoria walked over and checked out the meadow, but saw absolutely nothing. Caden continued to insist. He kept saying, trust me, Mom." And I was like, "I trust you. I trust you. I believe you 100%, said Victoria. Whatever young Caden was experiencing so unnerved and spooked the rest of the family that the other members of the family all unanimously agreed it's time to put an early end to their day of adventure and make the 35-mile drive back home to Corrier. After arriving home, the event still fresh in her mind, Victoria decided to post about the weird encounter on her Facebook profile. We put it on Facebook to see if anybody knew anything about this area, and come to find out, there was a lady missing with a description that he described to us within a 5-mile radius of where we were, said Victoria. Now, as viewers of this channel know from our previous episode number 7, Sandra Hughes had gone missing in that area in June of 2020. The encounter became even more chilling when, according to Victoria, 3-year-old Caden's highly detailed description of the woman he had seen in the meadow was identical to the description of Sandra Hughes as given by the local authorities. He was very adamant that we needed to help her, and he described her down to blue hair. He said she has a black shirt, blue jeans, and blue hair, Mom. That's the exact description of her when she went missing, said Victoria. Then Victoria went and searched online for Sandra Hughes and found some photographs that had been released as a part of the search effort the year prior. Victoria said she got goosebumps when Caden readily recognized 3 of the photos of Sandra, identifying her as the woman he had seen in the field. As fate would have it, Madera County Sheriff Corporal Chris Williams just happened to see the Facebook post and found it intriguing, to say the least. So much so that he contacted Caden's family to further investigate the chilling account. Victoria said the corporal in charge of her case actually reached out to us on Facebook and was like, "Hey, we want more information and we want to bring you guys back up there and see if you could point us in the right direction." Corporal Williams has been investigating the disappearance of Sandra Hughes since the beginning of the investigation. On the following Thursday, 2 Madera County Sheriff's deputies ventured back up to the meadow to investigate, with Jake and Caden coming along to point them in the right direction. Unfortunately, the deputies found nothing new by way of evidence, although the case remains open. If she was possibly a ghost looking for some help, I hope that he could have at least helped and maybe helped the family find her, because it's been a long time apparently since she's been gone, Victoria said. The 4-wheeler that Caden and his family used while traveling in the mountains has now been nicknamed the Ghost Runner, and incidentally is also for sale. It's not believed that the spooky encounter is the reason they put the vehicle up for sale, as the family says they will continue to go adventuring in the Madera Mountains, but do admit there are a few spots now which they aren't anxious to visit again anytime soon, if at all. Local news reporters in the area reached out to the Madera County Sheriff's Office, who did confirm that they received a report of a possible sighting of some sort, and they did go out to the location to search for any additional leads or information. For now, the case remains open in hopes that this latest update regarding the spooky encounter may produce some new leads. Now, as strange as this new development is, it's not the first time that possibly a ghost helped solve a missing persons case. Back on February 21st, 1997, the TV show Unsolved Mysteries aired a segment regarding a missing persons case from almost 3 years prior. This report told the story of 23-year-old Christine Skubish and her 3-year-old son Nick. They were driving along Highway 50 in the Sierra Nevada mountain range in California when they vanished without a trace on June 6, 1994. Christine was a single mother and had recently completed paralegal training. She had plans of going to work for a prestigious law firm, and she hoped to make enough money so that she and her child's father could be married. Christine left her step-parents' home near Sacramento on June 5, 1994, on her way to Carson City, Nevada. After failing to make contact with her family after 3 days, her stepfather, Dave Stotzenbach, reported her and her son missing on June 8th. The police took the missing persons report, but there were no initial leads in the case. 5 days after Christine and Nick disappeared, however, a woman named Deborah Hoyt and her husband were driving along Highway 50 around 3 a.m. The pair were on a long overnight drive and had been joking and singing in order to keep each other awake. Suddenly, Deborah saw what appeared to be a completely naked woman lying on the side of the road. The naked woman's face was turned toward the road, and she was laying on her side with her knees slightly bent. She had one arm placed beneath her head and the other arm held over her head. The Hoyts were shocked beyond belief. They thought it must have been some sort of sick practical joke, or perhaps even a ploy to carjack them had they stopped. Deborah floored the accelerator instead and sped down Highway 50, not stopping until she arrived at the nearest phone booth, where she proceeded to call the police. In just minutes, 2 sheriff's cars were at the scene where Deborah had seen the naked woman's body. However, unable to pinpoint the exact location, the deputies reported that they saw and found nothing. The next morning, though, speculations began that the sighting had something to do with the disappearance of Christine and Nick, who were the most recently missing people from that area. Due to the insistence from the family, Deputy Rich Strasser decided to go back and have a closer look. Strasser figured that it might be easier to spot anything out of the ordinary in the daylight. Deborah had indicated that a particularly dangerous stretch of Highway 50, known as Bullion Bend, was where the incident took place. As Strasser patrolled the area, he spotted a new-looking child's tennis shoe on the side of the road. Immediately next to that spot, in the shoulder of the road, was a steep embankment. Strasser pulled over his cruiser to search the area more thoroughly, and sure enough, at the bottom of the embankment, he spotted the twisted remains of Christine's car. He checked Christine and observed that she was dead and unfortunately had been that way for quite some time. The deputy then went around to the other side to check Nick, who was curled up in a fetal position in the passenger seat. Strasser assumed the worst and was sure that Nick was also dead. However, when he touched the little boy's neck to find a pulse, it appeared that Nick took a breath. Strasser immediately radioed for an ambulance. Little Nick had been alone in the car for 5 days, yet he was somehow still clinging to life. Officials believe that sometime around 2 a.m. on June 6th, Christine must have fallen asleep at the wheel. The car veered off the road and plunged to the bottom of the ditch, striking a tree. Due to the embankment being so steep, other drivers drove right past the accident scene for days, unaware that it was just over the side of the road. It was later determined that Christine had been killed instantly on impact with a tree. 3-year-old Nick was all alone with no way out and no one to talk to. Christine's mother says that she believes that little Nick spent the time talking to his mother, unaware that she was dead. Against all odds, he survived 5 days of intense heat and 4 nights of cold, trapped within the twisted remains of the car. Doctors who examined Nick stated that he was in such bad shape that he would have most likely died within a couple of hours had he not been found when he was. The strange encounter that saved Nick's life seems to defy any rational explanation. If Deborah had not seen the naked woman lying on the side of the road, Nick would have not survived. Now, it's absolutely impossible for Christine to have been the naked woman. She was still fully clothed and wearing her seatbelt when found, and the medical examiner stated that she was most likely killed on impact. Deborah Hoyt is 100% certain that she saw a naked woman on the side of the road. Both she and Christine's family believe it was Christine's spirit who saved Nick that day. The spirit had apparently appeared in the nude in order to draw attention. Nick, years later as an adult, was interviewed on a television show, Paranormal Witness. He remembers seeing a bright light surrounding the car following the accident. To this day, he believes that his mother was watching over him following the accident and helped him to be rescued. The show also revealed that Christine's aunt had several dreams or premonitions about the accident, before Christine and Nick were even reported missing. She dreamed of seeing them lying in their car in a ditch. She also saw the number 16 in the dream, which turned out to be the number for the mile marker nearest the accident site. Well, there you have it. What do you think about the apparition that little Caden observed, which she identified as Sandra Hughes, even down to the color of her hair, which was dyed blue when she went missing? Is it possible that Sandra's spirit is attempting to communicate with the living in a desire that her remains be found and her friend and loved ones have closure? It certainly appears that way. And what about the 2 other times she was spotted by hikers? Was that actually her, or was that an apparition? Thank you for listening, and we look forward to your comments on this strange case. As always, we ask that you please remain respectful of the victims mentioned, their family and friends, and the opinions of other commenters. Until we meet again, take care of yourselves and each other. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll see you a little farther on down the road. I'll talk to you next time.